Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's 5:02. And tonight, just by way of announcement, you can tell that we've got a teleconferencer in. That's Jason Capel, who's one of our trustees. He's met all the requirements there at his site in Washington to vote and to participate fully in the proceedings tonight. It looks like it might be a little bit of a challenge if we're not speaking loud enough. Jason, can you hear me with this?
Yes, we got you, and Stella's with me as well.
Okay, great. So we'll get used to the timing here in a moment and go ahead and proceed. So I'd like to call this to order. And again, 5:02 and a roll call. Gwen McMullins?
Here.
Betsy?
Here.
Terry Andrews here. Jason Capel?
Here.
And Katie Clark.
Here.
Do I have all of the forms for folks that would like to speak tonight? Are there any outstanding?
Oh, yeah. Do you need them now?
I'd like to get them, so just to take a look at them as we go.
But you're about to go into closed session.
Pardon me?
Are you not about to go into closed session?
In a few minutes we will, yes.
Cool.
We've got the adoption of the agenda for tonight. And is there any discussion about that?
Yeah, just one quick thing. If we could, would it be possible to move item 13C, the presentation of the annual financial report, up to right after item 12, right after we do the consent calendar, to let our accounting and consulting group get out of here earlier rather than later?
Are there any objections to that change?
None.
No.
No.
There's no objections, then yes, we will do that.
Thank you.
Is there a motion that we do?
I can make a motion. I move that we move item 13C up after item 12.
Okay, is there a second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
All right, the motion carries.
Because you have someone on teleconference, you have to do every vote as a roll call, so you'll have to go through each trustee and they can make their vote.
Okay, great. So we're going to vote individually, Jason. Do you vote aye on that one? Did I hear that right?
Yes.
Okay. Katie Clark?
Aye.
Terry Andrews, aye.
Betsy Conn, aye.
Gwen McMullins, aye.
Okay, that motion carries then. And we are going into a closed session at the beginning of this meeting, which is a departure from the way that we've normally done it. And we expect to convene again sometime before 6 o'clock. So don't go too far. We hope our business in closed session doesn't take very long, and we'll be back.
Has anybody given you anything for 4?
Number 4, actually, I'm sorry. There was a public comment before item number 4, and that's Ira Bershatsky.
Check this is working before you start the clock. How's that? It's working okay?
Yes.
Yeah? My name is Ira Bershatsky, and I have come here today to clear my name. My intention is to have the truth be known and documented on the public record. The former library director made accusations against me as a Board of Trustees member. I was accused of harassing the former library director, that I retaliated against the former library director's alleged whistleblowing, and of making derogatory gender-related comments towards the former library director. The former library director's attorney requested that an independent third party be hired to investigate these accusations. At a cost of $30,000 to the Altadena Library District of taxpayers' money, a law firm that specializes in these types of investigations was hired. Their report showed that the accusation of harassment was unsubstantiated. The accusation of retaliation for alleged whistleblowing was unsubstantiated. The accusation of making derogatory gender-related comments was unsubstantiated. Every accusation against me by the former library director was unsubstantiated. If all of the former library director's accusations are unsubstantiated, why is the former library director and the former library director's attorney getting paid a settlement of $540,000? The long-term legacy and negative consequences of this year-long debacle include dividing the library staff, dividing the community, dividing library patrons, garnering negative publicity for the Altadena Library District in Altadena by having false accusations published in the media and stated here in public comments, has had a negative impact on donations to the library as shown in the annual budget book, and evidenced by 50% less funds than 3 years ago being contributed to the library by the Friends of the Altadena Library, and cost the Altadena Library District over $500,000 of taxpayers' money, which is 15% of its annual budget. The $500,000 cost comes from $40,000 in investigation costs, $210,000 in attorney's fees, which include $80,000 in responding to Public Records Act requests, and $175,000 as the portion of the district's contribution to the settlement agreement amount. All funds that could have been used to hire librarians, buy books, have more programming, attend to ADA issues, or maintain and modernize the district's library facilities.
All right, thank you, Ira. Are there any other folks that would like to speak? I've only got the one slip. All right, we will adjourn into closed session and be back as soon as we can. All right, we are back from our recess. I should have called it a recess instead of an adjournment before, but I'm new at this, so bear with me. Our closed session recess, and we do have some reportable action from that. And I'm going to turn that over to John Cotty, our attorney tonight, to let you know.
Trustee Andrews, members of the board, good evening. My name is John Cotty. I am filling in for Ruben Duran tonight, your general counsel. I did attend your closed session tonight. There were 3 items on your closed session agenda. The first involved a conference with legal counsel regarding some litigation entitled Catay versus the Altadena Library District. At the conclusion of that item, the council approved a settlement agreement by a vote of 3-0 to 1 with 1 abstention. The vote of that was Mr. Zambrano was not present. Ms. McMullins voted yes. Ira Bershatsky abstained, and all of Ms. Khan and all of the council board members voted to approve. There was another item on your agenda involving public employment for your interim district director. At that meeting, the council discussed the potential hiring of Ms. Cleary as your interim director. The council took no reportable actions with regard to that item and with regard to item C, which also involved the appointment of Ms. Cleary potentially as your district director. That item will be discussed publicly at item number 7 on your agenda. Other than that, the board took no reportable actions.
Thank you, John. We're going to move on to item 7 now, but we've got comment from some folks before that. Renee, yeah.
Thank you. I must say I'm confused by one statement about in the report out, which is Mr. Zambrano is not present. I do not believe that Armando Zambrano is a member of this august body, so I'm confused. Perhaps if someone could explain that to members of the public why he would be involved in that would be great. But
I will. This item has been discussed in closed session several times and has been approved by Mr. Zambrano when he was a member of the board. So it was, although I take that back, he was not present at the time it was discussed previously by the board and approved by the board. It was approved by a vote of 3-0 to 1. Mr. Zambrano was not present, but has signed the settlement agreement and otherwise approved it. Mr. Bershatsky abstained, but has also signed the settlement agreement. All of the board members have signed the settlement agreement.
still confused only because there are so many of them sitting here in front of us.
And let me rephrase, the board members that were present at the time the lawsuit was filed. So Ms. Clark did not sign the settlement agreement.
Thank you for that clarification.
And as you know, I'm filling in, I apologize.
Thank you. And so back to the resolution here that you're going to potentially deal with. Some very interesting elements. One, a name has already been mentioned, a name is already known, and yet this was going to be a private process, so I'm not sure how and why and when and where information was made public regarding who was intended to be chosen for this. I'm also curious by the fact that the library is currently advertising for a district director with no information on its website regarding the responsibilities, the pay rate, and all that. It's just a matter of contacting Ms. Khan for further information. I mean, yes, if you dig, you can find it, but it's not like the library is actually looking, and I don't know why. As I look at this resolution, I think that perhaps it's required by PERS, CalPERS, as a function of this. So it'd be great to hear if anybody has any comment as to why that, I'll get there, why that position is posted on the district's website as it is to a very limited degree, other than perhaps to comply with state law for offering an interim position. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's no one else that, Mark?
I haven't, okay. I'm working on it, Terry, sorry. I might have to add a number. So Mark Marisco, Mr. Connie, it was great that you gave a quick explanation to Mr. Amy. So I don't know if the board can address this tonight, but two different things with the report out was one, the vote was taken at a previous meeting, I guess, when there was no reportable action, I believe, reported out from other meetings. So I don't know if Mr. Connie can add some more of like, when did that vote take place, just so we could know. And then what was really the settlement, or are you going to explain that later on in this meeting? And maybe you can share, if you're going to share what that settlement was, yes or no, later on. So those are the only couple things there.
I can address both points. The settlement involves a release of all known and unknown claims by Ms. Katay in exchange for the payment by the district of $550,000 to Ms. Katay. There's also a, well, that essentially is the terms of the settlement. She will also dismiss her lawsuit that is currently pending in the Superior Court against the district. With regard to when the actual settlement was consummated, it wasn't fully consummated. All of the prior board members, my understanding is, approved a settlement agreement previously, but not everybody who was a party to the lawsuit had signed the agreement and otherwise approved it, and hence it could not be publicly reported. So that's where we are. That's why we're here today. I hope that answers your question.
And I can add for some clarity that the vote was taken on November the 26th with the existing members.
I think it's also worth noting for the record that of that $550,000, a substantial portion will be paid by the library's insurance through SDRMA, with the remainder to be paid by the library in a series of installments. There also will be, just so you guys know, a publicly available copy of the entire settlement available starting tomorrow here at the main library. So if you'd like to see a copy, you're welcome to come and get one.
Okay, with that, if there's no more comment, we'll move on to item number 7, which is to adopt a resolution appointing Cynthia J. Cleary as interim district director pursuant to the 180-day waiting period exception, pending a background check and approving the employment agreement. So the resolution, we won't read it into the record. It's here in front of us. I presume, have folks in the audience seen this?
The public inspection copy does not include any details. It's all blank. So your mention of the name is the first time it's been publicly mentioned in a meeting.
Whose name?
Cynthia J. Cleary. And we'll introduce her as soon as this is done. John, would it be appropriate for me then to read this entire resolution into the record?
No, you don't need to read the entire resolution into the record. You might want to summarize the main points of the resolution. The board is free to discuss it and take public comment, and also hear from Mrs. Cleary. She's in the audience, so it's the board's pleasure.
Okay, with that, I'd like to I'd like to hear a motion to get this voted on, and then we can have a discussion period in which some of these issues can be answered.
I think, Trustee Andrews, I think we have to take public comment prior to actually approving the resolution. So if there's anyone that wants to speak on the issue, now would be the time.
Right, and the number 7 item, prior to number 7, if I've got this right, is there are no other folks that need to speak to that number, right?
May I take up, would you give me a minute?
I'll give you a minute, sure.
Thank you. My concern is, and I think before you make a motion, you should do the public courtesy of providing, well, you've done the name, but there's a lot of blanks here, including how much this individual will be paid, little details like that, that before you make a motion should be, I think, part of this resolution. So thank you for that.
My intent to get a motion on the floor was simply to have a discussion among the board members before the vote. And I'd like to continue in that vein. We can try to address some of those items as we go through our discussion so that you know what we're talking about in some of the detail. So again, I'm going to call for a motion on approving this resolution.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
So is there a discussion? And obviously there will be regarding this resolution. And let me start with this. Cynthia Cleary was by far the best candidate that we saw in our search. There was an ad hoc committee of Betsy Kahn and I that took a look at several candidates. And we have been working with her to get the terms of her employment adjusted and so on. She will start at an hourly rate of $67 and
68 cents.
Pardon me?
68
cents per hour, which is at the top of the scale. She has well over 20 years of experience in library supervision, having come from the City of Glendale Library. She's been retired for more than 6 months and has indicated a willingness to come back to help this library get its bearings again after all of the tumult that we've been through. The resolution that's in front of us is simply to approve her employment, and there's still some items that need to be taken care of regarding the background check and a couple of other items, and if there's any small negotiating items that take place on the contract, we'll handle those as appropriate. Does anybody else have any comment on this?
Well, I know, so Betsy, I know you were going to talk a little bit about the search process and how that worked. I think it'd be great to hear about that.
So part of what's been incumbent upon us as a subcommittee, as an ad hoc subcommittee, was to make sure we got very clear and complete understanding of the conditions under which it's legal to employ a PERS annuitant post-retirement. And so, one of the requirements is that the person has to have been retired for longer than 6 months. And John, spot me if I miss anything. One is that this person is employable for a maximum of I believe it's 960 hours total, which works out to roughly, would be 6 months if it were full-time. But we are on a clock the minute that we hire Cindy as an interim director in terms of how many hours she's allowed to work, so that that will be documented very carefully. Another requirement, as Renee deduced, is that an active search for a permanent director be in place. And so the posting that you saw on the website was, the very first baby step toward opening a search for a permanent director. We'll be discussing that process a little more later in the agenda when we talk about our various committees and the plans that we talked about formulating at the last meeting. So, so back to the question, that was kind of the first step, was to make sure that we really understood and complied with the PERS rules. We, you can imagine that, I mean, the pool of people who might be interested and willing and available for a short-term position like this, under these circumstances, who had the kind of experience that we were hoping for, is by definition quite small. And so we did interview 3 people, and very grateful for the interest that each of them exhibited. Each one did have relevant experience, and frankly, just the generosity and willingness to serve this library, as Terry alluded to, sort of the tumult that we've been involved in. It's an extremely generous person who would like to step in and help us move past that and through that and on into our next phase. So we did have 3 very interested and interesting candidates, and given the experience that each one of them presented and the skills that each one of them offered, we felt that Cindy was a very good match for what we need right now. And if you don't mind, Cindy, if we can introduce you, and would you like to maybe say a few words in way of your own introduction? We'd really appreciate it.
Good evening.
Good
First of all, I want to thank you for your expression of confidence in me and what I can bring to the Altadena Library. I wasn't looking for a job, but when it came forward, it was very intriguing to me, as I used to live in Altadena. In fact, if I hadn't married my husband, I probably would still be in Altadena, but he lived in Pasadena. So I am looking forward to working with the board. I've already met some members of the community. I'm very much looking forward to working with the community, and I've had a taste, a little bit of experience with the staff, and what I see is an incredibly strong system with people that really, whether it's the community or the staff or the board, who just love the library. And as a person that worked in libraries for 37 years, you can imagine that's near and dear to my heart. So I think, if this moves forward, which I'm hoping it does, that we're starting on a strong base. As I said to somebody earlier, as far as I'm concerned, it's sort of tabula rasa for me. I'll come in and get to know everybody and learn the system, and I hope I can contribute.
Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Are there other comments or discussion from the board members?
So I just add that after the ad hoc committee interviewed the 3 candidates that they identified, we then as a full board had an opportunity to meet with Cindy and ask her, any questions that we had. And I know I can speak for myself, and I think some of my colleagues when I say we were very favorably impressed. And there were some things that really stood out in her experience, not least of which was overseeing some major building construction renovation projects, which are obviously incredibly important for us as we move into some of our facilities challenges, as well as dealing with some questions of process and structure. And so I think we're going to have a great partner as we move through this transition process and begin our search for a permanent director.
Jason, do you have anything to add?
I would just say, just to jump on board with everybody else, I feel like we got very lucky to find somebody with this amount of experience, considering everything we've been struggling with lately. And I think it's exactly what we need right now, somebody with a great deal of experience who's going to help us bridge the gap and help us move forward as we continue to search for a permanent director.
And I guess this is Gwen McMullen speaking, and I'm the only one who had not met Sydney But in reading her application and resumes and letters of support, I believe that she is probably the best candidate for us at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion's still on the floor, and I think it's time to call for a vote. And we'll do this individually. Trustee Capel, your vote, please.
Yes.
Trustee Clark.
Aye.
Trustee Khan.
Aye.
Trustee McMullins.
Aye.
And Trustee Andrews, aye. So the motion carries. All right, on to number 8, public communication. It's just, I'm not seeing any slips for that one. Is there anyone that would like to? Okay.
Thank you, you should. Real quickly, people have made comments about public records requests, and in front of each of you and a few members of the public have, I didn't know how many people would be here tonight, an interesting document I received as a result of a public records request for legal billings, and it's got a lot of redacted stuff on it, but that's not what's important. What's important is what's not there. If you look at it, you'll notice what's in question is $1. And $1 isn't a whole lot of money, is it? What can you buy with $1? Not much these days. If you look at this public record, it's a bill the library district received, one of many. I mean, you guys have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, okay? Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars intended for the benefit of the public on lawyers. You got one sitting here tonight. That's a great thing. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet, something funny about this one document in all the bills you guys have received is the missing $1. This bill from Boderud Law and Mediation is for $9,999 because there's $1 missing. And it's not like, you know, it just kind of went away somehow. No, if you look at it, you'll notice that it was originally sent in on December 3rd of 2018 for $10,000. And then it was revised down using a negative adjustment on the back side and resubmitted on 7 January 2019. I'm an attorney. I know a lot of attorneys. Attorneys reduce their billings when they are ordered by a court to do so. Or they're worried that they're going to get caught at something. I don't believe there was a court order in this case. But I believe there's something special when it comes to the number $10,000 and approval for expenditures by the governing board of the Altadena Library District. Now, there's a little thing called conspiracy, and there's a little thing called criminal conspiracy. And there's a little thing in all of that where you gotta have two, bad people thinking bad things, and then they actually have to do something. Like, if they're going to avoid scrutiny by the governing board of a library district, they have to get together and look at that. Oh my God, it's $10,000. The library board should approve that. So what do? They say, let's make a simple negative adjustment by $1, and then the library board won't know. So what do we got here? I think you should ask the question exactly what went down. I've asked for all the public records regarding this company to try and find out why that $1 went missing.
So your time is up, Renee.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other folks that would like to speak at this time? Okay. We're going to move on to item 9 now, and that's reports from the support groups. So the first one listed is the Altadena Library Foundation. Is there someone here tonight to speak to that?
Mark Mariscal, treasurer of the Altadena Library Foundation, and then I'll just follow up, do them both together as president of the Friends of the Altadena Library. the foundation had a meeting a week ago, I think, last week. Terry was there. And so one of the things we did was approve a budget, and in there, we have put back in money for after July 1st to then match part of the Friends money that would be part of the literacy program. And Cindy will learn about she knows about it, but the matching funds that we have to do. But more importantly, what I think I want to say is that Cynthia Carmona, who when the board of trustees, when the foundation board went down to 3 members and a few of us came back on to kind of rejuvenate the board, Cynthia took over as president. And so she asked to not run for re-election. Her last week would have been a re-election time. And so we have a new president of the board of directors for the Library Foundation, and that is Bridget Brewster. And so Bridget is currently out of state right now, but probably will be here for the February meeting, so I do want to share that information. And then when it comes to the Friends, I will say that, and Jonathan must have known I was going to say this, he walks out. But the Friends and the foundation both have wanted to make sure that there were some improvements at the Bob Lucas Library. And I will say that in today's agenda, there's the tree cutting for here, but there's the $24,000 proposal that you're going to be talking about for the doors. And I don't know if I'll be here at that time, but I will tell you that there's no question that both organizations support that. But one of the things the Friends and the Foundation would like to at least reiterate out to you, and I'll say it to Jonathan again later, but I was telling him earlier this evening, is that the outdoor landscaping has been discussed at this trustee meeting before. So when Armando was here, he discussed briefly about it, but there was a whole list of priorities that needed to get done. And so I would just like to share with you that, that the Friends would like to ask that you, when you get to the committee, the facilities committee, have a good discussion about how the outdoor improvements could be done in a higher priority than some of the other things, if it's possible. So I would like to say that. Thank you. Well, because Granny said that. I would, since Michelle Sachs here too, let me just tell you one thing that the foundation, and I'm going to talk to the Friends next week at the Friends meeting, or 2 weeks from now. But Michaela is working with Altadena Heritage, and we're going to help either the Friends or the Foundation or both with, what do you call it? Altadiddy 2.0. And what that is musicians that live in Altadena will be invited to come here on Saturday, April 6th, and perform a song. And a song that they're writing about Altadena. So we're pretty sure somebody's going to write a song about the adventures of a library board. Maybe even Renee, if he's got some bongos to play with it. But something will go on April 6th between 3 and 5, so we invite you all, but you'll hear about that going forward. Thank you. Both reports.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. All right, we're going to move on now to item number 10. And Mark, we had you as a commenter before that one. That's the financial reports for November.
Cool. Yeah, the only thing I saw in there was some language from the auditors, so I'm just assuming that the books are closed as of June 30th, and the auditors have been doing some stuff, but I would just think that that's going to get programmed soon for the auditor to come and talk. Are we hearing that tonight, though? Because I didn't see the full report in there. Or was that because it was in because it wasn't in a previous one either?
It's available on the website. We weren't able to.
Oh, okay. Well, we usually see it ahead of time and do that, so I didn't really look for that. So then I will.
There was a copy as well on the.
Okay, I'll go look at that now while they're talking, but I might need to come back and share a couple things then. That's okay.
Okay, no other speakers for item 10 now? All right, so that brings us to number 10 and the financial reports. Nicole, go ahead with your report.
There's nothing particularly of note for November. Our revenue streams are still performing above average, and we're hoping to do the mid-year budget adjustment next month as long as we can get the committees sorted out. But as Mark brought up, the main attraction for this evening is the financial audit for fiscal year 17-18. And I'm sorry, the agenda mentions that Paul Kmart of Platinum will be presenting it. Paul is here, he's available to answer any questions, but it's actually Peter Glenn of our auditing company that is here to give a brief overview and also answer any questions.
Okay. David, any questions from the board?
I just have one. Would you please just, I'm not sure where I wrote my little note.
I'm sorry, Gwen, did you have a question?
Just one quick question. There was something in here, and I'm not sure what page I saw it on, but it referenced the passport at 120, I believe it was $120,000 as an estimation for the budget. Was that correct?
I believe so, that number sounds right. Yes, we did, we budgeted $120,000 for the
Okay,
passports.
okay. But last year, did you budget that much for that?
We did not, we actually budgeted more this year because we expanded the passport hours of operation.
Okay, all right, so that was the reason for that, okay. I just noticed that, you've captured probably 48,000, and I just thought somewhere in there, I can't remember what it was, but it was an interesting figure, and I just thought maybe you over-projected, that kind of thing.
We did also begin accepting credit card payments, so
Okay.
patrons have a few more options to pay. So that number is a bit of a stretch, but I still think it's doable.
Thank you much.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I think we're at 58,000 at the end of December. So half a year.
Okay,
Wow, we could meet that by 2030.
okay, I just thought it might have been a stretch. No problem, thank you.
Are there any more questions from the board members? Okay.
No, I'm good.
Then, can I get a motion to approve the financial report?
So moved.
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve this, and we'll start with Jason. Can I get your vote, Jason?
Yes.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. The next item, do we have any speakers for that one? Moving on to item number 11, but we do have a public comment for that one.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to give a shout out to the library for its 1K before K program. I managed to catch the very end of that kickoff event here at the library where there were animals and all kinds of, other than me, interesting stuff going on and a great event until it started raining, unfortunately. But one reason I want to speak now is that's great. You want to have lots of little kids and their moms and their dads coming into this library. I don't know how many of you people watch what happens, but I watch. And I see the moms with strollers parking in the library parking lot, thinking they're going to be able to take their stroller and their kids into the library, until they find out they can't. They can't because this structure is not ADA compliant. You think the people that it's all about are old people. Okay, old people like me. Somebody 60 or whatever and above. Old people who have limitations, who need canes, who need walkers, who need whatever. It's the young people that you should be trying to get into this library. And honest to God, I'm ashamed of that fact. I'm ashamed as a citizen of Altadena to have explained to the young mother with 2 little kids that she couldn't reasonably get her stroller in. So she took the one walking him up the steps and then put the other one on her hip to go up all the steps. That is shameful. I've mentioned I'm an attorney. I think it's time for a lawsuit. I honestly, God, think it is. I know you're talking. You're going to do it eventually. You've spent more than it would cost to fix this library and make it ADA compliant on getting rid of the last library director and bringing in a new library director at the very top of the pay scale, again, than it would cost to deal with the real root issues at this library. And it is shameful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Yes?
Mary, may I say something just for the public and for the record? Jonathan might be able to speak to this as well, but we've discussed placing some signage at the door that says if you need to use the elevator, to go down the walkway to the back door, because we will let anybody in that needs to use the elevator in that back door and walk them through the hall. And usually a staff member is personally walking that person, and often it is a stroller, through the hall, into the elevator, turning the key, because it's a very old elevator, and it has a trick to it, but, you know, turning the key, letting them up, and then, you know, letting them out to the main floor. So, yes, it's not ideal, but I do want everyone to know if you need it, it's there, come to the back door. Our office is downstairs, we'll see you outside, and we can open the door and let you in.
Thanks for that report, Carmen. Okay, now we're on to the item consent calendar. And is there any, well, first of all, is there a motion, please, to approve the consent calendar?
I'll move that.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve that. Are there any discussion items regarding this?
Just a couple things from the departmental reports that I'd like to pull out quickly. One is the launch of the new website, which if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet, I really encourage you to do it. It's pretty cool because the library has been able to move the website entirely in-house. They've done a total redesign. It looks great. It's a lot easier to navigate, and it also is much more accessible, both for people who are Spanish speakers, for people who have any other kind of accessibility issues, and it's only going to continue to improve as they're testing and redesigning other elements of it. So if you haven't seen the new website yet, definitely take a look because it is amazing. And then the other thing I wanted to note quickly, which is in the reports both from our children's and our teens librarian, is how successful our graphic novel holdings are in the library. If you check out some of the charts, you'll see that almost half of what's being circulated are graphic novels, and that amount is growing month over month. And I think it really speaks to a responsiveness and an interest in serving, you know, the populations that we have and what they're interested in doing. And I'm personally pretty excited that kids are coming into the library, finding something that they want to find, and coming back in greater numbers every single month. So just a couple of things to draw to your attention that I think are pretty amazing.
That's good.
Okay, any other comment? Jason, do you have anything?
That was good.
I have some comments on the board packet, some changes I'd like to suggest, but I'm holding that until we get to that item under new business. So we've got the consent calendar moved and seconded. Got to get a vote now to approve that. I'll start with you, Jason, please. Jason, we're taking a vote now to approve the consent calendar. Can you hear me?
Yes, I got you.
Okay, and your vote is?
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
And Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
So remember, you only need 13.
Right, we're gonna move that one up.
And you've got
We have had a request to move item 13C to the top of the list on this. And before we start on this item, we've got a request from Renee Amy to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to point out, and I'm sure your auditor will do this as well, that typically people get confused. They think, oh, great, you know, the audit shows everything is clear, and that's a good thing. What does that mean? Does it mean that the library district's money, the resources entrusted to it by Altadenians have been wisely spent? No. What it means is that there's been no indication through a series of standardized tests, which are relatively limited in their scope, but they're standardized tests as required by state law to ensure that there has been no theft or irregularity in the books. This is not a gold seal imprimatur that management of the library has been conducted in a wise, sage, or appropriate manner. All it means, and it's still good to see, is that staff isn't cooking the books and staff isn't stealing money. And that's wonderful. And people will congratulate each other and no doubt congratulate staff for not cooking the books and not stealing money to the degree that the audit's tests require. But to think that there's anything more to this is to do a disservice to the community. So just so everyone understands, audits are only as good as far as they go, and they're very limited when it comes to public agencies. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And Mark, we've got you reporting to item C.
Yeah, I would just like to ask permission to be able to ask questions after we hear the report, if that's okay. I mean, it's challenging to ask questions before we know what they're going to say.
Yeah, I think
Are you
that's
okay with that?
reasonable, sure. All right, with that, we'll hear from Nigro or Nigro regarding the, I'm sorry, spacing the name here for a second.
Good evening, trustee Andrews, members of the board, members of the audience.
Hang on, just a second. Could you pull that? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taller than your average auditor. Good evening, members of the board, trustee Andrews, members of the audience, and members of the district. My name is Peter Glenn, and I am here to present, I'm a representative of Nigro. We're your audit firm, and I'm here to present a brief overview of the audit as of June 30, 2018, for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2018. The audit, as kind of has been mentioned already, provides reasonable assurance. It does not provide absolute assurance, so I believe that was a comment that was kind of alluded to already. I would encourage everyone to look at page 1 of the audit report, and what that does is, although it's a little bit, maybe a little more difficult to digest, it does discuss different responsibilities. The responsibility of the district to stand behind the financial statements, and then the responsibility of the auditor to express an opinion upon them. So that's our role here. And we do it with a fresh set of eyes, as we like to say. We're independent from the district. We don't, obviously we don't have anyone here that consults or is an employee of the district, so we're independent in that regard. And what we're able to do is to give our opinion in reviewing the financial statements and auditing them and the supporting documents. We felt that they do present fairly in all material respects the position of the district. So basically what that means is you can have confidence or reasonable assurance that the amounts that are contained in the district's financial statements are in fact materially correct. What can be confusing is looking at the different financial statements, and because of governmental accounting standards, there are basically two sets. There's one set that is a longer term focus, so you'll see familiar things such as long-term assets, some long-term liabilities, your pension program, and then in the other set of financial statements, those are a short-term focus, and those are known as fund financial statements. And those discuss things that are more in line with your budget, so basically your annual expenditures and how things fall out in that regard. So in both cases, both statements show at the end of the year a favorable net position and a favorable fund balance, and both saw increases to their respective net position and fund balance. So that is to say, revenues did outpace expenses in both cases. And of course, the variance can be in, again, not to get too deep into the weeds here, because I know that's not what most of us do here, are that the shorter term focus items are really accounted for differently than the longer term, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way the Governmental Accounting Standards Board wants us to present them, and that's what's required. So that's why we can say that when your financial statements are presented, we can give a clean opinion on them, is because your financial statements are presented in accordance with Governmental Accounting Standards, or GAAP. So I'm not going to jump too deep into the weeds on any particular item, other than to say those particular things, that there were positive gains in both the shorter term and the longer term focus. There was a new GASB pronouncement that the district adopted. It was GASB 75, and that had a particular impact on the financial statements. That is discussed in the opinion letter, and it's also discussed in detail in one of the notes, note 10, and that had a pretty big impact on the financial statements, because again, a GASB standard changed, and that dictates the way that the district has to account for post-employment benefits. The events were evaluated subsequent to June 30th, 2018, and that is discussed very briefly in note 11, which was the subsequent event, which you've already discussed this evening. So that is mentioned in note 11. And the rest of the report goes into some of the required supplementary schedules and information in the back. And then there's also a discussion on a evaluation of some of our tests of controls. And those tests include things so that we can then in turn determine how much we're going to test a particular area. So it kind of reviews what the checks and balances are of the district, so that then we can determine how much or how little, if you will, of something that we need to review. So we didn't identify any events or any controls that were deficient that needed to be brought out as any type of finding in the report. So with that, I'd be happy to take a question.
Here's a kind of a silly question, but I'm not aware of your history with the library and how long you've been our auditor. Is a few years, or can you give us a little background?
No, this is our first year as your auditor.
Okay.
The prior auditor, I believe their contract ran out, and then your district went out for an RFP, and we were selected as your auditor.
So just to clarify, I know you addressed it, but if you could just confirm, so this audit doesn't include any of the expenditures on legal fees or future settlement payments, because those are all subsequent to the end of the fiscal year, is that correct?
That's correct. In this case, those were events that were subsequent to that balance sheet date.
Or whatever lawyers' fees were, included up until June?
Yes, yeah, they would have been included up until June 30th.
Okay, but everything subsequent to that is
Right.
not included in this report?
Including that settlement.
Correct,
Yeah.
okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, we've gotten another. Pardon me? So I think that's the best way to handle questions that Mark had asked about, would be simply to have you come back up for a moment or two and ask the auditing company what's on your mind.
Well, one, I want to say to the trustees that are, Gwen might have only been the only one when we did the audit selection, when the auditor was selected. And there was a good debate about it, actually. So I think this institution has a good auditor. The audit report is very good. It's typical of what most government audits are. So a couple things that the board should consider is asking about the $3.2 million cash, real cash, effective of June 30th. But he can come back up and address it. The real issue is you're required as a board to keep somewhere around the 6 months, and I quickly asked Paul, he says the numbers that he's been working with the library, because I think you used to be with the audit firm that we used to have, right? So it's somewhere in the 1.5, even if you want to be safe, it's 1.7. The reason I share that is, theoretically, then you really had cash available at $1.5 million on July 1. So I just want to make sure that's confirmed. That can be allocated to anything. Now, of course, so far 155,000 or so of paid invoices through November for legal fees are there. December, January, all those things are going to keep going on. But I raise it, and I'll raise it one more time in one more part of the meeting tonight, because it gets to, there's a good $700,000 to $1 million that this board can move on some of our deferred maintenance items. But I want to throw out again, and I know you get tired of hearing it, but the idea that you could float a $3 to $5 million bond and have some of that down payment there ready to move forward and then work with the foundation to raise some additional dollars has to be part of what the budget committee looks at down the road. So just from there, I think hearing from the auditor that there is a confirmation that there was $3.2 million plus in available cash, that you have a requirement that you need to keep some number so that you know what that is, because it'll help you in your budget committee work and in future things.
Did you have a specific question you wanted to pose?
Well, yeah. So my question is, how much money needs to stay in the GAN reserves or whatever that requirement is to make sure that the local government entity has, and then can you do that subtraction and let the board and the public know what that amount is available, that is totally available to be allocated for anything? Is that good?
Sure.
Clear as mud.
It's very
Clear as mud. I think that's more of a budgetary question.
Right.
So when we work with the mid-year budget, I think that's more where this is going to come up.
Yeah, and I don't know, being new at this, to what extent we're getting out of order by having people pose questions, in this general session, rather than just speak, the things that they have to say. So I'm going to leave your response at that, and then we'll just move on to more business. Folks that want to pose questions on the agenda items we're going through, going forward, feel free to do so, but you're going to have to round up the people you'd like to talk to about it after the session has been closed. So that takes us then to approving, I believe, this 13C, the
I think it's a receive and file.
receive and file, right, the audit report.
I'll have a motion that we receive it and file it for
Okay,
audit.
it's been moved, second?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded that we receive and file this report. We'll start a vote now unless there's any more discussion. Okay. Trustee Capel, your vote, please.
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
And motion carries. Now, I got hit with a request or two here before. We've got one speaker before item 13A, which is going to be next on the list. We'll start with that with Renee Amy.
Thank you. So this is an update from the ad hoc subcommittee, which we may or may not really wind up doing. But just a thought here. You're hearing from a lot of consultants and attorneys and all the rest of that You're hiring in as an interim director an individual who, I haven't seen their resume, but I believe has no professional experience in a special library district. We all know that Altadena is special, but we all also know that Altadena Library District is created under the Ed Code, unlike other libraries in this state. And it is, as a result, kind of a weird critter. And it would be really good if, instead of relying on legal counsel and outside consultants, this library district ensures that as it moves forward, too late for the interim, you've already hired an individual, apparently with no experience in a special library district, but it would be really handy and a good use of taxpayers' funds to hire somebody who is familiar, because there are weird laws that a library director would be able to answer your, Mark's question about. So please, 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 as that process moves forward, keep that in consideration, that again, we're special in so many ways, but we are legally special, and it can cost a lot of money to ensure legal compliance if you don't hire someone with experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers for 13A? With that, I'll turn it over to you, Betsy, for a report. There's really not much to say that hasn't already been said, I think.
I think we've done our reporting in the report out from our closed session, so I'm going to consider that this report is done.
I don't know what sort of formal action is required to basically to close this committee. And we've got another committee that would be starting that talks about a permanent director. So
We could make a motion to formally dissolve the ad hoc subcommittee for an interim director position.
okay.
So I'll go ahead and so move that.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and the question on the floor is to dissolve the ad hoc subcommittee for the interim director search. And are we ready for a vote? So Trustee Capel, your vote?
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
Trustee McMullins?
Hi.
Okay, carries, thank you. The next item is 13B, and we have two speakers that would like to speak to that. I'm going to call Mark first, please.
I'll pass.
You pass, okay, and then Renee.
Thank you. Just quickly, and by the way, a shout out to the disembodied voice of Jason Capel. It's nice to see technology being used here. That said, because it's an opportunity to do so, I'm going to take issue with staff. I don't like to, because I understand the effort. The comment was made, just come to the back door. Some of us remember back when who got to go to the back door? Yeah. Was a disgrace in our society. And another issue when it comes to individuals with disabilities, they shouldn't always have to make it clear that they need help. It's disgraceful. And again, with all due respect and understanding, every effort is great, but it isn't the answer. And there's a lot more reasons. People always think, oh, it's just this or that, or they just want special help or whatever. There's a lot more to it, and it's about dignity and respect of members of our community pursuant to federal law that's been on the books for more than a generation. So that said, as I look at the various facilities you folks are looking at, I also wanted to comment briefly on the bylaws committee. I sat in on at least one bylaws committee meeting last year, and I would recommend that there are no attorneys on the board now. It would be a good idea to have someone who is an attorney assist. Shorter bylaws are better, generally better than longer bylaws, and just throwing more stuff into a set of bylaws isn't necessarily a good idea. So you might want to consider how much community outreach you're going to do on all of these various and sundry committees, such as the Facilities and Executive Search Committee as well, whether that will be an open or closed committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other folks that would like to speak?
Michelle.
Yeah, I wasn't Michelle Zach, and I'm not sure if my item was actually on the agenda, but I just wanted to ask about when you do the formal search for the permanent director, that whatever, you know, it will be a lot more important than the one for the interim. And I hope that community input, besides just from the library, I know I was on the last committee, and we really did consider very much looking for a librarian with experience in a independent group, you know, independent library district. And, you know, I don't know, I think someone from the Friends, a few people from the community, but it really was a community-wide search. And we all did, you know, reach consensus, although it didn't work out in the end. I do hope that the next search will also include people from the community. Thanks.
Thank you.
And also I did want to make a comment, I can't help it. You know, the front door of the library is ADA accessible. And I always come to the front door because it's so beautiful to enter the library over that bridge. And at the time that the library was built, it was actually ahead of its time in that it was ADA accessible from the front door, but it never has been from the back.
Can I make one comment on that? The front door is accessible, but if you park in the front, you can't get out of your car if you're handicapped because of the dip.
Yeah.
Yep. And the ramp's too steep. Doesn't mean.
Maybe they'll
I don't want to get too out of order here, so if there's anybody that wants to speak, just let me know, okay?
So maybe that's what you want to do.
And I believe that clears the list that we had for that particular item.
Thank you.
So now we're gonna go into these.
Right. So we've got a series of committees that were formed at the last meeting by vote. And according to the minutes and my memory as well, the committee chairpersons were going to come back with a better description about how they'll operate and if they're ad hoc, standing, how they'll collect information from the public without getting too detailed. And we would vote on those items one at a time and make sure that they got memorialized in the record. So as we go through the committees, I think we can start with number 1B, which is the Facilities Committee, which according to the record, Jason Capel is the chair on that, and I would be the second member. So this hasn't been rehearsed or practiced in any way by any of us. We're going to go a little freelance here, but the chairpersons, like I said, of each committee, they're responsible for bringing a resolution or a motion to the floor that we can vote on that gives a little bit more detail about how these committees will operate. So Jason, I know you're talking to us remotely, but I'll start with you. If you could offer a description that we could craft into a resolution to put into the record, that would be appreciated.
Yes, I'll certainly do my best to do that. Hopefully everybody can hear me clearly. So what I would propose to be included in the motion is that, and just to remind everybody, there is a standing committee, a staff committee that already meets regularly for the facilities. So, you know, and I'm not looking to duplicate any work and stretch people any more thin than they already are. So my resolution would be to establish an ad hoc facilities committee of 2 board members who would sit in on the regularly scheduled staff committee and then report back on that committee's work at the regularly scheduled board meetings as part of a standing agenda item.
So a true ad hoc committee of 2 board members, you and I, that almost serve as a liaison in that we talk to staff at their meetings regarding facilities and development and then relay that information back not only to the board at our meetings, but I'm just going to chime in here. I also think that those reports should be made available or given to the Friends of the Library and to the Altadena Library Foundation as well, since they're our primary fundraisers. So Jason, do you have any trouble with me adding that language in as well?
No, I think that makes complete sense.
This is gonna be difficult for Kylin because she'll be the one that has to put all these things into words and make the resolution. But,
Sorry, can you be clear between resolution and motion?
yeah, I'm gonna say motion because the resolution is a lot more formal. But I'd like to express the elements of the committee in the motion. And what I've written down so far is that there's a motion that would establish an ad hoc committee of 2 board members that will attend staff meetings regarding facilities and development and report back to the board at the next meeting, and also report through the liaisons to the Friends of the Library and the Library Foundation.
So I just want to clarify.
A little confused. So you, at the last meeting, there were motions and votes to create the committees. So now, are you just clarifying, basically providing clarification for each of those committees?
Right.
Okay.
When you look at the minutes, in some cases, it was explicitly stated that the chairperson would come back and report, make a motion that described the committee in full. I think that's what we were after. And I just like to, like I say, start at the top. There's one committee, or 2 of them actually, I don't think that need any more explanation. One would be the Budget Committee, which is already a standing committee and operates with the rules of a legislative body. And also the Bylaws Committee, which is a currently standing ad hoc committee, is my understanding, because it has 2 persons.
So can I ask John a question?
I'll put the mic on, even though he's sitting next to me. Is there a motion needed to provide this clarification, or can it go into the record without formal motions? I mean, because the committees were created formally already, and now they're just clarifying, providing that clarification. That's, that's a question.
Trustee Andrews, members of the board, I believe that this can be done by minute order. That's perfectly appropriate.
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, it can be done by minute. It can be done by minute order. There are several ways to make a motion. You can do it by formal resolution, by ordinance, or by minute order. Minute order is just a memorialization of the action of the board. So yes, that can be done.
Is there a vote that's needed for the minute order then?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a formal action of the board. It's just not written down in the form of a resolution. I would note a couple things though. First off, item 14A is a Brown Act refresher. Perhaps now would be a good time for me to jump in and talk about some committee things that I'm hearing that might clarify some of these issues. Number one, I'm hearing the term standing committee and ad hoc committee almost used interchangeably. And they are very different, and they have very different purposes and roles. The Brown Act requires all meetings of the legislative body to be open, public, and agendized with an agenda and formal actions of that nature. An exception to that rule is what's called the less than a quorum exception. So if you have 2 members of the board acting on a specific task of a limited duration, you can create what's called an ad hoc committee. So when you talk about a facilities committee, it was, as I heard it, it was almost a committee that's going to exist in perpetuity and deal with facilities on an ongoing basis. And if that's the intention of the board, that meeting would technically probably be best described as a standing committee subject to the formal requirements of the Brown Act. Notice, posting, things of that nature. So if you wanted to make, for example, if you wanted to make a motion to examine the current condition of a specific library and then have a report back and have that committee end, that would be an ad hoc committee, much like the committee that we discussed a little bit earlier, the committee to appoint an interim director. So I think that's an important distinction. Standing committees are subject to the Brown Act. They are a specific subject matter, specific meeting date. Ad hoc committees are not. They are less than a quorum, a specific subject matter that is for a limited duration and once the task that's assigned to that committee is completed. So I hope that maybe clarifies. I might have just made your job more
No,
confusing.
I knew all those elements, and thank you for stating them. I think the thing that was missing in Jason's language and in mine as well would be the end date to this facilities committee. And Jason, if you could speak to that, I'd appreciate it as a chairperson.
Yeah, so, you know, and it's another one of the committees that we're looking at, but, you know, obviously we have an expired strategic plan, and so, you know, my thought and really what's driving my personal approach on the facilities issue, and I think it speaks to some of the comments that have been made tonight as well, is, you know, we need to make sure that the various and far-reaching issues specific to facilities are built into the new strategic plan. So my thought would be, you know, that this ad hoc committee would exist until we have a new strategic plan voted on and approved and in place to ensure that the, you know, issues and concerns regarding the facilities are included and built into the strategic plan.
Let me jump in. Trustee Capella, I understand what you're saying, and that's fine. I think it's important to note, though, that the specific task, or it's important to clarify what the specific task is that's being assigned to this committee. Is it an ad hoc committee to analyze the state of the facilities for inclusion into this report, and that when that report's concluded, the task, the committee ends? That's perfectly appropriate for an ad hoc committee, and I think you can just use that for a motion if you want. If it's of a longer duration and more, the task is going to be to analyze all facilities on an ongoing basis, it's more likely a standing committee, and you should probably phrase it as such and just notice your meetings for something around it.
When we
No, I think the idea and the intent for now would be that the committee would dissolve once the new strategic plan is approved.
And I agree. I think that's what we had discussed in the last meeting, about the idea of just lining up projects and communicating with staff in an advisory way so that everybody knew what needed to be done. To me, there's a little bit of a disconnect between our fundraising institutions and what we're actually doing in terms of, especially in vis-a-vis taking care of some of the ADA deficiency we have. And I'm on record several times of complaining that this whole process has taken years too long. So what I envision, just proposing this committee, and Jason was on board too, I think, a mechanism, an ad hoc committee that acts as a liaison between the groups that have buy-in to this project, and getting the individual projects prioritized and then in the committee.
Very well. Ad hoc committee.
Since this is being tied to the strategic plan as sort of a contingent factor, just as chair of that committee, I'd request that there be some kind of deliverable to the strategic planning committee, or at least to the board, so that we know what you guys discover. I think it's great that there's a liaison capacity there, and I agree that liaising with the support groups is really important, but I think some kind of specificity in terms of what's found, what those projects are, what the scope of work is, what the priorities are, would be very helpful in crafting a strategic plan that addresses those needs.
And that's exactly the sort of thing that we'd like to do with this committee. I don't know if we need to get that granular in the detail and so on, but...
You did say that. You said a report back to the board and
Yeah.
to the support groups.
Okay. Well, we can convene if we approve this step tonight, Jason and I, and report back exactly next month about the progress.
And then the committee dissolves?
The committee would dissolve. It sounds to me, Katie, as if you're suggesting it would dissolve at the same time that the strategic planning committee would dissolve, right?
That was Jason's suggestion.
So, Jason.
And I believe I'm on the ad hoc committee for the strategic plan as well. So I I think I'll be able to share the information I gleaned from my other committee.
Outstanding.
In my mind, this is a stab at making sure that there's a cohesive approach to the projects that we need to do here at the library. And also, in my opinion, that might be a mechanism that's been lacking in the past. So I will take one more stab at a minute order then, and that would be that we establish an ad hoc, a true ad hoc committee with 2 board members, Jason Capel as the chair and me as the second person, that will attend staff meetings regarding facilities, planning and repair, and report back to the board and also the fundraising institutions of the library. And that ad hoc committee would have a finite life with a date of dissolution that would match the strategic planning committee's date. Good enough? Get all that timeline? Or I guess you'll go back and look.
No, I'm good. But I do have it on video. No, I have also, what Jason said was,
The committee would analyze the state of the facilities to be included in the strategic plan. The committee would dissolve when the strategic plan was approved. So that's basically.
All right, good. Is there enough information then on record to reflect this accurately in the minutes? And okay. So with that, I would ask for a motion to make this a minute order. Is that right, John?
Yes.
Okay.
So moved.
I'll second. But John, can you just define a minute order? I'm not clear on what that is.
Sure. There are several levels of action that you can take. Obviously, the most stringent is an ordinance.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
yeah. Here.
The most stringent is an ordinance. The second level would be a resolution. The third level would be what's called a minute order, and that's an order where you're directing staff verbally to take an action, or you're taking an action verbally. It's memorialized by your board clerk, and that's how the action is memorialized. So it doesn't have to be formally written down. It will be formally recognized in your minutes. You ratify those minutes as part of your agenda, I assume. So that's how that minute order is taken.
Can I ask, what's the difference between a minute order and a motion?
The motion is the mechanism to approve any of the 3 items. So you would move to approve an ordinance or adopt an ordinance. You would move to adopt a resolution, or you would move a minute order or a minute action.
Okay.
The minute action, the motion is just the mechanism.
Thank you.
So it's been moved and seconded to describe the committee, get it into the record as a minute order. And is there more discussion, or can we get a vote? Okay, no more discussion. I'll start with Jason. Your vote, please.
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
And Trustee McMullins.
Aye.
That motion carries. The Budget Committee, I don't know if we need to amend its function with any sort of a minute order, because it's a standing committee now and will continue to operate the way it was before. Last time, I was nominated to be on that committee to fill a vacancy. I think we're done with that. Okay. The Executive Search Committee is one, Betsy, that I'd like you to talk about because you'll be the chairperson of that.
So, yes, at the last meeting, we moved, or I guess Terry as president appointed an ad hoc committee for the search of a permanent library director, and decided he and I are on it, and I am the chair of that committee. I've given a lot of thought and consulted with our legal counsel about the composition of that committee, and I'm committed to finding a way to balance a way in which applicants for that position can feel confident in a confidential process, because if someone is out there right now as a library director and they want to apply for this job, they need to know that this process is confidential. On the other hand, of course, as has been mentioned tonight and many times in the past, we certainly want to solicit and consider and get a robust offering of public opinion about what this community is looking for in the next library director. And we would like to solicit that feedback from you, the community who comes to our meetings, from staff, from perhaps people in the library profession who might have some thoughts about what they would recommend. And so I'm going to suggest that the committee proper, the ad hoc committee proper, remains an ad hoc committee of the board with the 2 members of the board on the committee, but that as part of our process, we will be actively soliciting input from the groups that I just mentioned through community meetings, surveys, focus groups. We'll bring back more detail about the different avenues that we will use to make sure that anyone who has input to give us about what the search should find will be able to communicate that with us. So with that in mind, maybe I'll go ahead and start to craft a motion and then we can talk about it. Although now that I think of it, if we've already had the action of forming the ad hoc committee, well, let me just I guess round out the action that was taken at the last meeting. So I propose a motion that an ad hoc committee for an executive search be formed, consisting of myself as the chair, Terry Andrews as the co-member of that committee, that the parts of the process that we will engage in are a review of the job description, planning the process for soliciting input from members of the committee, creating the application period timeline, creating an application screening rubric, engaging in the application screening process, and then interview and selection of our future director, and that this committee would dissolve at the conclusion of that process.
If I could add, when you say engage in the application, the word you used, but that would be a formal board function. So the ad hoc committee would have to make a recommendation to the formal board for hiring. But you can screen, interview, but you would have to make that formal recommendation. You don't have any authority to hire. It sounded like you.
No,
I misunderstood.
I'm not staging it. No, of course. So thank you for clarifying. Then the final stage of this process would be to bring a recommendation to the board for the board's selection. Yes.
Is there any other comment to this?
Terry, are you willing to have a public comment? I think we need to.
Okay. It's been suggested that I should ask if there's any public comment to this. And we'll do this in the 3-minute segments that we've formatted or less. Go ahead,
I have
Randy.
one question. Am I understanding, or maybe I don't understand, that the two of you are gonna make the selection for the new director and not have a committee of people? Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Well, I think that's wrong.
Well, I
That-
think,
I'm sorry, but I think that's wrong because the community is very involved in this library. And to have 2 board members decide without having community input and talking to those people is wrong. That, I just made my comment.
and
Something to say?
I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was the point I was clarifying, that the two ad hoc members will not be making the formal selection. They will be making a recommendation to the full board. So the two ad,
Yeah.
But my comment is on the
If
last.
I may, before this whole thing gets too out of order here, let me temper what Betsy said with a comment or two of my own. We haven't talked about this, so we're winging it a little bit. I think an ad hoc structure, which makes Betsy and I members, is an essential part of the search committee. I think the way that we get information from the public can be done in a way that allows that to happen, everybody's opinion and so on. But the minute we get membership of the public on the committee, this moves it toward a legislative body, okay? And I think when that happens, we've got Brown Act issues and all kinds of things going on that we've been struggling, as you've seen, as a board over the past year to manage. So I think the insularity of having it be an ad hoc committee for the structure can be offset by our plan, our method of getting the community involved, which could include an open hearing, if you will, or the public listening to what we have to say and how we're deliberating to a certain extent, and making sure that we get these the appropriate feedback from the public about these issues, even to the extent that someone's got a recommendation they want to make that they think we should do. I don't see a problem in an ad hoc committee format doing that, but we have to engage you without membership of people on the committee. That's my take on it.
May I make my quick comment now?
Yes.
The last search committee included someone from the Friends of the Library.
Michelle, I'm
someone-
gonna stop you for a minute. If we're getting into this public comment thing again, we'd like you to go to the lectern, and you got your 3 minutes, and let's hear from you, and we'll hear from others.
I
We're
don't
gonna
need
open this
3
up.
minutes. Michelle Zach. I just want to say the last committee had 2 members of the board, someone representing the Library Foundation, someone representing the Friends of the Library, and then someone who was selected just as an ad hoc community representative, and I think that's who I was. And the idea that, and we were all pledged to confidentiality, so I think it's possible to have a committee that is slightly more broadly based, but that would still provide all of the confidentiality needed, and it seems certainly the foundation and the Friends of the Library, are groups that should be involved in the choosing of the next director.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers to this?
Can I say something?
I'll just use this one real quick, and I realize I'm taking potentially 3 extra minutes, but you've changed the format. And that is this. There is a big difference between engaging effectively community members and having them on a board, for example, or having a series of retired local library directors or special district library directors serve as an assistant function or on a board, as opposed to community gatherings where input is gathered and what is known as Delphied, where it's a process whereby valuable and viable and important input is lost in the shuffle of paper by a consultant who is paid to make sure that the results sought are the results that are given to deciding-making group, i.e., if you know what you're doing, you can craft the input from the community, whether or not you want to hear what the community actually has to say. So when we look as community members at the selection that you have made, you two individuals, Ms. Khan and Mr. Andrews, for our interim library director, again, an individual who has no background whatsoever in special library districts, we have to wonder, what's that going to mean, how's that going to reflect, and how's that going to transfer into the case for a permanent. So if you're looking for public confidence and instilling and encouraging and growing public confidence, I think you're going absolutely the wrong way. Thank you.
We're going to cease comment for just a moment because Trustee Clark would like to get involved here.
Get involved. All right, so John, I hope you'll correct me if I am misinterpreting the Brown Act or saying something that is not correct. But I think it's helpful to have just a quick comment on sort of what some of the underlying legal issues are here, and then we can have a lot of discussion about what you guys on the board want to do, what you guys think. But here's the deal. So you can compose, and Brown Act is weird this way, you can compose an ad hoc committee of less than a quorum. And because we have 5 members, that means you can have 2 members of the board on that committee. In that situation, that committee is not subject to the constraints of the Brown Act. That means they don't have to publicly notice their meetings, they don't have to agendize. They can, right? Because the Brown Act is a floor, not a ceiling. It tells us where we have to start, not where we have to end. But that's sort of the deal. The minute you add other people, right, whether additional board members or members of the community to that ad hoc committee, it then becomes a legislative body that is subject to the constraints of the Brown Act. And I don't disagree with that. But just be aware that that's part of the conversation that's happening here, and I think it's an important one we should talk about. We should have that discussion. If that committee is a legislative body, because it includes members of the community, basically what that means is then the committee is required to publicly notice their meetings at least 24 hours in advance. Oh my God, you know. And then also to agendize what they're gonna do. For an ad hoc committee, it's actually 24. But they're required to, for a standing committee, it's 72. Unless, yeah, so those are sort of some of the considerations that I think you're hearing at play here, and I just wanted to clarify those because I was not clear on some of those myself, and it was helpful to have that portion of the Brown Act explained. Why it is that having 2 people and then you add people from the community makes it a legislative, you know what, I don't necessarily know why that is, but that is the case under the law. So just so that's out in the open, I think it's an important component of this conversation.
So we have the motion.
Can I ask a question of the attorney? I have a question.
Pardon me?
Can I ask a question of the attorney?
Sure.
So, John, can you clarify for us a kind of a hypothetical, let's say? Let's say we did have a committee that was composed of 2 board members plus members of the community, which did then cause us to need to comply with those Brown Act regulations, and we publicly notice a meeting, and we call a meeting, and the purpose of the meeting is to review applications of people who have applied. How do we, I mean, I know that in general, personnel issues are able to be talked about in closed session. Would that be the way we could do it and then preserve the confidentiality of applicants?
Unfortunately, no, because you're including non-attorneys on your board. So you'd be inviting other than board members and other than attorneys into your closed session. You can't do that. You can only get, the board can only get advice from legal counsel in closed session. You can't open it up. How it was done in the past as to, I know, I think Rochelle said it was confidential before. It might have been just by agreement. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to go back and look at the bylaws or look at the look at the documents, it's certainly possible that everyone just agreed to keep it confidential.
I guess
And
it was an illegal committee maybe.
It sounds like you probably didn't comply with the Brown Act.
And look what happened.
That's
Well,
exactly
and that's not,
right.
and I don't mean to imply that they did anything illegal. I mean, you know, again, it could have just been, they all agreed to keep it confidential.
Can you do that?
But maybe, did they notice their meetings? Did they
I don't know the answer to
post
that.
them? Did, that's what I'm trying to
I don't
navigate.
know.
What I'm hearing is, from the public, is the notion of transparency with regard to the process. And there's nothing that would prevent the ad hoc committee from initially recommending to the board a full discussion by the board about the process and getting the public's input there. There's nothing that would prevent the ad hoc committee from making a recommendation that you do a public review panel or a library professionals panel. I mean, there's all kind of ways to engage the public in this process, and the ad hoc committee is perfectly capable of defining those, discussing those, and engaging the public to make sure it happens. So,
That was my thought as well, that there are ways to reach out to the public and get their input without making them part of the committee, which is, I think, the right way to go. So I don't know to what extent your language, Betsy, needs to include, methods or processes that would involve the public and what they might be, other than to say that those would be forthcoming and
Well, I did include some of that language. I don't know how much you caught of it. Kylan, can
Well,
you?
you said actively solicit input from the community staff, other professionals.
seems like that would do it.
Thought so.
Why don't you say surveys or things like that?
I believe
Give an example of what the process could look like. I don't think she was trying to solidify it.
And not forums, public forums.
We're gonna try to get back in order regarding public comment, okay? And right now, the language has been expressed for a motion that would be a minute order. And
Kylan, would you mind, sorry,
Yeah,
would
yeah.
you mind reading back what you have?
So, an ad hoc executive search committee for, sorry, it was kind of out of order. So you started with reviewing the job description, planning the process, actively soliciting input, creating application period timeline, application screening, rubric and process. I have to watch the video again. Interview, and then making a selection to provide a recommendation to the board for hiring. And then the committee would dissolve once that process was complete.
Mark has a comment.
You good with that?
I'm going to ask board comment on whether or not you feel it needs to be more specifically in terms of ways in which to solicit community and staff input.
I'm going to add this language then. The committee would, from time to time, reach out to the public to solicit opinion and information and advice from them during the process, and leave it an open item for now until we determine what tools and stuff we use to do that.
I'd like to make a comment, if I may. So, I understand the concern about confidentiality, and I get the need to keep people's, personal information private, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think that there is such huge value in having a committee that is actually constituted of members of the public as well as members of the board, especially for the search for a permanent director. I think that that's essential. And while I believe that the best of intentions are at play in trying to structure this, I think that we kind of have to show our work. And so I would advocate for a committee that was constituted of both board members and members of the public pursuant to our bylaws, which would make it a legislative body, but I think that's just the cost of doing business and something that we really ought to do.
I agree.
I've got to say, if I was a person who was interested in this job, and I was employed, and I wanted to be able to pursue a new position, and I knew that my resume was going to be read in an open public meeting before I ever knew whether I was even going to be selected for that position, I probably wouldn't apply.
I mean, I understand your concerns. By the same token, there are plenty of public bodies that have search committees. I mean, PCC just went through a search committee process to bring in presidential candidates, and there was a whole mechanism by which that can be accomplished. Now, I'm not saying that I know exactly what that is, but certainly there are best practices we could follow that would allow us to maintain, you know, the correct standards and processes in hiring while still maintaining an element of transparency and public participation. So I think it's done on a regular basis. I would be very interested to know what PCC's structure was. Now I really wish I had looked that up.
When I worked for the school district, and that's all under the Brown Act, we had a committee, when we got a new superintendent, where we had representatives from the PTA, from school site council, everybody knew it was confidential. The resume didn't go more than the people that were on the committee.
I'm going to ask, please, that we don't get any more shout-outs from the audience on this.
I apologize.
Okay. I'd like to get us back in order. There are going to be points during the rest of the meeting where people can come up for public comment. Please get your item in then. If you want to go backwards and address this a little bit, feel free to do it. But I think right now we have language for a motion. I get what everybody's saying. And in answer, sort of rebuttal to Trustee Clark's observation that it should be transparent and the community should be involved, I would argue that they can be, even under an ad hoc committee structure, if the ad hoc committee commits to a series of engagements with the public that can be done in this room or elsewhere, in which we solicit advice and observations from the community about what the library director should be, and even, in my mind, who a good library director might be, so that we could interview those folks. But I do agree with Betsy that to make this hiring by committee will take a long time and will scare off a lot of candidates. That's my opinion.
Terry, is your microphone on?
So sorry. You want me to start from the beginning?
No.
So I would be in favor of a committee that is an ad hoc committee, and that doesn't become a legislative body. This is my reasoning, which it would if there were committee members involved from the public, because we are trying to walk a fine line on the Brown Act violation, the alleged violations that have come to us in the past. I think that we can have the committee structure that we're proposing here, but get input from the public in an appropriate way. And we can bake that into the minute order that we're working on now. That's my feeling.
Would you ask Jason?
Jason, we'd like to hear from you about this.
Yeah, running to a lot of stuff through my head as I listen to all this. And then also understanding, we have, this is going to be a long process regardless of how we do it. But we also, we have an interim director right now that is not going to be with us forever. So we have some kind of time constraint. So, my thoughts are two things. One, I wouldn't support a situation in which we have a completely open process, under the Brown Act where anybody can show up. I mean, what happens if folks that have put in their application and are candidates start showing up to the meeting under that kind of process. I think that becomes problematic. But at the same time, as Katie said, there's plenty of other organizations who have done this, and I don't believe it was a completely open Brown Act legislative process. It seems to me there has to be something in the middle that satisfies both sides of things, because other organizations have done it. I mean, the PCC is a public body; it clearly falls under the Brown Act. So, I mean, I'm almost thinking we need to look into that further before making this decision. But I mean, that's my thoughts that I'm struggling with right now.
And I'm sort of struggling with that same situation too, because of how it did happen the last time. And I'm not really sure how, did we violate the Brown Act at that point or not? So I'd ask that we sort of step back from this and maybe take a look at it from some different perspectives. And I don't know where they might come from, but I really don't want to get involved in the Brown Act violations again. If in that, I know that there are other agencies that do, that are public agencies that do have more than just two people making a decision. And I know that our foundation is our partner, our friends, they're part of that whole partnering. So I'd like to sort of step back and sort of see if there are other ways that we can involve and getting the community involved in, but it is a legislative kind of thing.
So it sounds like, well, this item may be continued, but maybe with what Katie and Gwen stated, and Jason as well, that the best practices can be brought back as a future agenda item for the board to consider, as well as maybe continuing this specific committee.
Would it be possible? I mean, I'm almost thinking, because I don't want us to wait another month before we can start accepting applications either. We do need to move forward on this process. So, man, I'm almost inclined to approve the ad hoc committee with, the caveat that we have a report back at the next meeting in February about, for instance, how did PCC handle this? Because certainly nothing stops us as a board from making a new motion in February to take what is currently an ad hoc committee and turning it into something different once we know what the process is and what the alternatives are out there that have been done successfully.
So Jason, just to clarify, you would advocate that we go ahead and vote on the minute order as it stands with a two-person ad hoc committee with the proviso that that item come back on the February agenda in light of some best practices from similar institutions, at which point we may decide to revise the minute order as it stands and either modify the ad hoc subcommittee to include members of the public or leave it as it stands. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any comments?
The committee does exist, so we don't need to do anything to make the committee exist. We decided that at the last meeting. So that would be one way to go. Another way would be to just have the charge of the committee be between now and the February meeting to bring back those best practices. I don't know, I'm not sure that it makes sense to lay out a process that may become irrelevant or may not, unless we want to say, okay, this is the process, unless we find out that based on what we find out, we decide that there's something better.
Okay, well then, may I suggest an amendment to the motion such that we describe the scope of work of the Executive Search Committee to be that they return in February with an outline of best practices from similar institutions regarding public participation in a search process. Would you accept that amendment?
Yes, I would.
I would like to have that amendment also contain language that allows the committee to start looking for applicants. That doesn't preclude us. In other words, our first order of business won't be to get best practices and report back, but it would also involve some opportunity of speaking to applicants and trying to get some momentum going toward the hiring.
Well, I would not include that language in my amendment, and I would be opposed to any formation of this committee that doesn't include members of the public, but we'll vote on it and, you know.
Well, remember, the committee's already been formed.
Okay, but well then I would be opposed to any minute order describing its scope of work and its membership constitution.
May I say something? I think it would be premature in any case to think that between now and February meeting, we're gonna be talking to applicants. I don't think we're anywhere near that point yet.
Okay.
So I don't think we need to say that we need to be able to do that along with finding out the best practices. I think as far as the scope of work that I was speaking about earlier, well, I guess I'm gonna backtrack and just say I'm comfortable with my motion as it stands with Katie's amendment. But I don't think but I guess I'm just repeating myself. I don't think, sorry. I guess my basic sense is that with the language in the motion and with Katie's amendment, we've got plenty to do between now and February. So.
Could you state that motion again, Katie?
Well, so the motion was originally about a minute order describing the scope of work of an ad hoc committee for an executive search for a permanent director. My amendment to that motion was that before any of that work commences, the executive search committee return in February with an outline of best practices from similar institutions that admit for community involvement and participation in the search process in a meaningful way. And that the question of the scope of work then be re-examined in light of that.
Boy, this is hard. Yeah, with that language, I guess I do start to be concerned about delaying our process, and so I would just say that given job one, which is the best practices task we are now going to launch on, if we find out something definitive, that means that we can not delay until the February regular meeting, that we keep the option open of calling a special meeting and clarifying this so that we can move forward more.
Oh yeah, we can call a special meeting anytime. I wouldn't want it to happen without public conversation.
Got it.
So however that transpires.
And I don't think we need to codify that in a motion, but just to lay it out there.
Okay. So we vote on the amendment and then on the motion. Unless you want to accept public comment.
Any other comment?
Not
Trustee
to me.
McMullins, anything?
It's interesting to take.
Mark Mariscal, would you like to, your hand's gonna lose its blood there, picking up in the air. You have 3 minutes.
Mark Mariscal, Friends of the Altadena Library. So let me say this. I think the motion shouldn't exist, and I don't think the friendly amendment should. I think what we heard from Trustee Khan saying the ad hoc committee exists. It currently doesn't have some direction right now, so really it's, Katie, you either make a motion that give it some direction or let it do what it's doing. But let me say this, as somebody who has gone through having a headhunter come after me and go through that process, and I got selected and went up to Monterey, as you know, this board can hire a headhunter, and then it's all totally done. But the headhunter then can use the process to talk to entities and groups and people, so that's one way. And so I really think, and there's more I can say, but what I really want to say here is I really believe that you have this email that's up already, or you have the thing saying anybody have any interest, send it to you. You run into that Public Records Act, which, again, the attorneys can stop it so that we don't know what it is. I really think there needs to be an entire email address sent separately that is excluded from any potential Public Record Act request. And so it may be that you might use your HR firm to receive all the applications, right? HR Network or whatever it's called. The other thing is, and Mr. Cotty, I believe that having an ad hoc committee that just takes the applications in and then creates a process that allows that they would select 3 to 5 professionals from the outside of a panel to go through and review them, right? And then make the selection of the top 6 or 7 to bring in for interviews. And then have another committee that this ad hoc committee would make up and go get then a subcommittee of another set of maybe 2 panels, because I've gone through this process too, where you have, you come in for an interview with professionals, and then you come in to interviews with community members, which could be 3 people. All that still stays private. All done by the ad hoc committee just leading the cause of it, so that you don't then need to have public meetings saying this is where you're at. That the ad hoc committee is doing its work. It will report back at each one of the meetings. And then after you get through that process and you have 3 candidates, then I think that's where you're going to find out what happened at PCC and at PUSD or any other school district, where then when you come to actually have the interviews, you then, the last 2, 3, or 4 people standing, you're going to bring them in, you're going to, you pretty much are going to have to put them on a public agenda, their names. The interviews then are done by the full board in closed session, and then discussion takes place there. And then you come back and then you can make a selection. And from that you would have had, you would have had your 2 different kind of panels. You would have done what some of the people done, and you followed a process. I think that's a procedure that works. It works in a lot of public agencies. I've been a participant in it, I've seen it. Some of you might have been in those kind of procedures too. I think we're just dealing with some semantics, so I would almost kill your motion. Just let the ad hoc committee go and see if the attorney says that's okay, because you already have a charge, and that is to start the process. And then maybe next month, talk about where it is with some of those things in play. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, the motion, or the language for the motion would have been to have a minute order that describes the activity of the committee. I think since the committee already exists, that perhaps the best thing is to carry this over until the next meeting with, and the ad hoc committee will come back with a series of best practices. We've all been given a whole bunch of them to work on, and take it from there. We decided at that point that we want to amend the committee or dissolve it or change it. That'll also give us a little bit of time to research further that idea about, which is the one that's kind of stuck on with me, that if we get to be too big a committee, that we're subject to issues regarding the Brown Act. And it's not so much the transparency that I'm rejecting there. I want this to be a true transparent process, but the idea that if there are serial meetings or all the other violations that can occur with a committee that might not be as well versed in the Brown Act as we are now, that could be a liability toward to the library. And it might be one of these splitting hair type things that this whole concept that I'm talking about wouldn't be deemed illegal by one judge, let's say, who got that far, but it might be by another. I feel that's where we are. And I think probably getting more information about best practices is the way to go. So that would be my statement, Betsy, to help you work through this.
I think it makes sense for me to withdraw that motion.
Okay, so that motion has been withdrawn then.
Trustee Andrews, just to be clear, we are, so the ad hoc committee will bring back at your next meeting a report on best practices with regard to the hiring of a permanent director. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what we intend to do. Do you
I don't need a
recommend?
formal motion, I just wanted to make.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's what we would do anyway, though, because we're supposed to report back to the board. All right, moving on. That took a lot of time, and I apologize for that. The bylaws committee is, when you're still in charge of the bylaws committee, and I don't throw a curveball at you, but a few comments about.
And I believe that, Katie, you're also involved with that?
That's correct.
Okay, so the two of us will work together. You know, last time we had, and you're right about that, we had a community person on there with us.
Please speak into the microphone, I don't hear you.
Oh. So we will get together. We have made some adjustments to that, but we still need to review those. We've never brought them before. I think, Kylan, you are also recording some of this for us. And we need to review them again, add some things regarding the Brown Act to them, and get legal counsel to review them before we bring them back to the trustee board for approval or review and then approval. I think that's pretty much the way we're doing that. Okay?
So I don't know if that needs any kind of a minute order. It's a continuation of the process, but there is one thing that's always puzzled me, and that is, as an ad hoc committee, which I presume it was formed as an ad hoc committee, right?
Mm-hmm.
There should be some sort of an ending date to it.
Absolutely.
And I've never heard that stated. I'm not really sure what that is.
And I think that probably in the next month or two, we should have those bylaws at least for approval or review.
And just to clarify, the committee did not include members of the public as part of the committee, but the meetings were open to the public, and
that's it, yeah, okay.
They attended the meetings.
Yes, and I believe that, what's his name? He attended 2 of those meetings. Yeah.
If I might make a comment? Real quick.
Attended 2 of those meetings.
Just a thought here, and I appreciate I'm taking time, and it's all out of whack and order. Something about a document reviewed by the attorneys, what they're likely to look at is whether or not what you put in your bylaws is legal. They're not going to recommend best practices. It might be a really good idea on all of these things that you're doing, as we just heard after 20 minutes of discussion about how to hire somebody. What are the best practices in special library district bylaws? You have an interim director who knows probably nothing about special library districts, so that's going to make it a little more challenging, but maybe you can find the Special District Association, California Special District Association can give you guidance as to what those bylaws would look like for a special library district in the state of California, rather than trying to create something out of whole cloth and kludging stuff on and then handing it to a highly paid attorney who will say, I want to keep my job, thank you very much, this all looks good, and I'll be making money off of it downstream. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel, you need to look at the best made wheel out there and see if it needs any modifications to apply here. Thank you.
And thank you for your comments, and that was what we were doing at the last meetings that we held. They were looking at bylaws from special districts. Thank you so much. Yes,
I just want to, you
I'm
don't have
not
any
done.
bylaws now?
yes.
We do.
We do.
It's a revision process.
It's a revision. We're going through the revision process.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. So Katie and I will get together and hopefully within the next few weeks to
And
work
I'd
things
just like to request that we remain consistent in keeping those meetings open to the public.
out if you want.
I do.
That's fine.
Thanks.
That's fine.
So I, in this case, don't see the need for a minute order other than to, and maybe we just do this in discussion, try to get that commitment that it's going to be a 2 or 3 month procedure to get these revisions done.
Right.
Simply because it's been going on a long time and it's way overdue. This is
It's
the
way
document that's the
overdue.
most antiquated in the whole arsenal of documents we have, so.
Absolutely.
Fine. Good.
Great.
So there's no, we will take no action on that particular one. And finally, we get to the Strategic Planning Committee, and Katie can talk to that.
All right. We're all still alive. Okay, so here's what I am going to move in terms of the Strategic Planning Committee. So the strategic plan, just to give a little bit of background, expires at the end of this fiscal year. So it's good through the end of fiscal year 2019, which means that it is up in June. But I think anybody who's looked at the strategic plan recently knows that it's not providing us a ton of guidance up to that point. So it's something we really need to revise. It's something we really need to get as much input in as possible, and it's something that needs to be, in my view, a community-driven process. So what I am going to move is that the Strategic Planning Committee be composed of, that it be an ad hoc committee with a duration of 6 months to deliver a strategic plan by July 1st, 2019. That it be constituted of 2 members of the board, myself as chair and Trustee Capel as the other member, and that it be open to membership in the community as well. That means that it will be a legislative body. As such, it will be subject to the Brown Act, and that's fine. That means we notice the meetings publicly, we agendize them, and we abide by all the practices of Brown Act, and I'm sure that at the first meeting we can talk about what those are and kind of refresh everybody's memory on that. I think it's hugely important that we have actual membership on the committee in a real way. I think that that's something that has been not just requested, but it's something that ought to be expected from the board. And so I'm happy to take responsibility for making sure that we follow the Brown Act, that we're doing everything by the book. And so according to our current bylaws, the way that that would work is we would post a public call for submissions. I know I've talked to some people who've already expressed interest, and we would make that open to anybody. I also think the meeting should be public, so that anybody who wants to attend the meeting can't necessarily commit to being on a committee and all that that entails, but nevertheless is interested in the process, that they can engage with that at any point in time. So I would move that we have an ad hoc committee following those specifications to deliver a strategic plan to the board for its discussion, amendment, and adoption by no later than July 1st, 2019.
Is there any comment to that? I've got a couple of questions. I just want to make sure I have this straight, Trustee Clark, and that is that you're advocating an ad hoc committee that would have membership from the public. So I guess the question is to you, our attorney here tonight. How do you phrase that in a way that keeps that from becoming a legislative body? Because if it's an ad hoc committee with the 2 members, my impression of this is that it becomes a special committee and it doesn't really fall into the category of a legislative body.
You asked a couple questions there. The first was whether or not other members or members outside of the 2 members of the less than the quorum could be on the ad hoc committee? The answer to that is no. It can only be comprised of the 2 members, in your case, because you're a 5-member board, it can only be comprised of the 2 members. That's not to say that you can't seek advice from members of the public, or hear from members of the public, or hear from staff. There's nothing that prevents the ad hoc committee from subjecting itself to the Brown Act, which I'm hearing as well. So that's perfectly appropriate as well. I have one more point that's escaping me.
Special committee.
Oh, well, okay, that's right, special committee versus, your bylaws do have 2 types of committees, special committees and standing committees. Standing committees are also subject to the Brown Act. You also have what are defined as ad hoc committees and special committees. All of your committees in your bylaws appear to require compliance with the Brown Act. That's not to say that these can't be revised. The process to revise them is underway, but a typical ad hoc committee is not subject to the Brown Act. So.
And I guess my question is to, final comment here, Trustee Clark, would be, when you use the word membership on your community from outside, the 2 ad hoc members, that's where I have the little trip and fall, because I wonder if there's a different way to phrase that and say you're seeking advice, or you'll have advisors, or meetings will be open and public comment welcome, that kind of a thing, rather than establishing membership on that committee, which boots it out of the ad hoc category in my mind and into more of a standing committee.
So I want to make sure that I clarify something, and John, I hope you'll correct me if I'm misspeaking. My understanding, given prior conversations with legal counsel, was that a temporary advisory committee or an ad hoc committee that is a less than quorum committee is not subject to the Brown Act. However, once you add other members to that ad hoc committee, it becomes subject to the Brown Act. It is a legislative body. Okay, that's what I want to make.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
So,
I'm sorry,
but then,
I got
again,
it.
then it's not an ad hoc committee. it's
Okay,
a-
so what do we call it?
We call it, under your bylaws, a special committee.
We call it, okay, well then, okay, so everything I said, just replace, I thought, I didn't know, okay, fine, so special committee. I like it, special district, special committee, special. Okay, fine, so special committee composed of 2 trustees plus members of the public. All right, that's what I want to do.
And
And
you
you-
will, sorry.
And you are subjecting that committee to the Brown Act. by
Correct,
consent.
yes.
And I think you said this, but you'll, or the committee will be, I guess, to maybe putting out a press release to solicit?
Yeah, so our bylaws are not super specific. My goal is to sort of go across as many channels as we possibly can. So yeah, press release, social media, library website, Nextdoor, Facebook, any way that we can kind of reach people and let them know that this is something that's happening and we'd like their input.
Submit interest
To
and then you and Jason will be selecting then from the people that submit.
No.
Okay, so in our bylaws, the way the bylaws are currently written, what it says is that, and I'm gonna double check myself here because I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. So our bylaws as currently written say that membership may be composed exclusively of trustees, or may be composed of trustees, staff, or community persons, or any combination of the above. A press release may be issued asking for volunteers to serve on the committee if appropriate. I think that's appropriate. Members of the community wishing to be appointed to a committee shall submit a resume, which will be distributed to all members of the board. Approval of membership requires a simple majority vote of the board. So my reading of the bylaws, I don't necessarily agree with them, but my reading of what we have currently says that, yeah, so that people would submit a resume / statement of interest, and then the full board would vote on that membership. That's my reading of what's there currently.
I just wanted
Yeah.
to clarify that and get it on record, just because it was a little confusing.
I agree.
I just want to make a point, if you have it for 6 months, it's gonna go over the deadline.
Yeah, that's right. It should be June
The special
30th.
committee.
Yeah, you're right, okay. Okay. So, because 6 months from now, yeah.
5 months.
Okay. So let's say the end of July then.
If you might tolerate more public input.
I'm happy.
We're still under discussion here, Renee, let's finish this, okay? My comment to this is that our bylaws state those conditions of a special committee, but our bylaws aren't the Brown Act. So the Brown Act is a higher authority than our bylaws. So while that sounds completely doable, my understanding is that you would move it into the area of a legislative body with the addition of these committee members. Now that means that all of your discussions and all of the things that you do have to be held in an open session, and they can't be discussed by more than 2 members. So the very things that got us in hot water this last year are put in play with that. And my fear about this, and maybe I'm overreacting, but obeying the letter of the law, is that we've got a committee that might not be following all of the Brown Act requirements, and that there might be violations built into that and so on that could be used against the library again in the future. That's my basic problem with a committee with that structure. And that's why I favor an ad hoc committee, which takes us out of the legislative body realm, but an active ad hoc committee that goes out in a well-described way and seeks input from the community, not necessarily a vote from members on the board of that community. So the way you described this, I can tell you, is something that I would have a hard time dealing with. Now, I might be exhibiting an overabundance of caution right now, but having just described the settlement that we have to make, the library does, for the things that have happened in the past, I would rather err on the side of caution, but still have this committee have the tools that would allow it to be effective. So my problem with this is the structure of the committee, not necessarily with the transparency, with the community involvement, and all the other things that you described.
So if I could respond to that. I understand what you're saying, I really do. And I understand also that the Brown Act has been a thorny issue for this board, and has had the violations of the Brown Act have been part of the reason why we find ourselves in the territory that we do in terms of financial settlement. I completely understand that, and I can understand being wary of the Brown Act going forward, but I don't think we should be afraid of it. And I think that if we are afraid of following the law, we're never gonna get past this. And
Yeah, please. We don't need that right now, Renee.
You're out of order.
I think at the end of the day that, the Brown Act does provide within its sort of very nature some pretty forgiving elements, and it allows people to make mistakes. It recognizes that bodies are not perfect. I think that, if anything, one thing that I've heard is that, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if people sort of understood the Brown Act more and how challenging it can be? Well, this is a great way to experience it firsthand. I don't think that we should move forward from a place of fear. I think that we should try our best to follow the law, and I think that this is a pretty low cost and low impact way to do that. And if we make a mistake, then we follow the law some more, we cure and correct, and we learn from that and move on. So that would be my response to your comment.
This is Jason, if I could just share some thoughts as well. On this particular issue, I'm on the side of being completely open. We don't have the concerns of privacy like we do with searching for a new director. And then I believe part of what got us in trouble with the Brown Act previously was a refusal to recognize that we had made mistakes, and therefore it became a bigger problem. And I think moving forward, those of us with a commitment to recognize when things need to be done differently and be open about that and move forward, I don't see us getting into as much trouble going forward. I would support this being a formal committee that does have members of the community as formal members of the committee.
Do you have a, oh, my battery's dead. The battery's dead. Oh, no, it's not, it's fine. Do you have a size of committee in mind? Because that will affect how the Brown Act is observed.
I agree. I think we do have to put out a call and see what kind of interest we get back. I think that's only fair. I don't think we can say, you know, we're gonna limit it to 5 people or 7 people or 20 people. I think if we have submissions of interest from people who are genuinely, you know, wanting to be part of the committee, I can't imagine that that's gonna be a huge number, and I do appreciate that, you know, trying to do things with a committee of, you know, 30 or 40 people would be virtually impossible. But that's why I think having open meetings will provide a sort of second tier option for people who maybe don't want to commit to doing, you know, the work of a full committee member, but are nevertheless interested in being engaged in the process. So I also think that that's something we will have the opportunity to determine as a full board, right? Because those submissions of interest will come back and we will have the opportunity to vote on them. And so we can make a determination at that point as a full board.
Is there any other discussion on this item then? Okay, let's have some public
That
comment.
really quick public comment. Some people might think that I just stand here to criticize. I'd like to be helpful, and Katie, your suggestion of the timeline, I don't think that's realistic, unfortunately. I think it's too quick to get the job done, especially because you've got another subcommittee. I think it was the first one, the building, that's going to report back, and then all of that has to be integrated into. So I would urge potential. I'm not going to complain. I promise I will not complain if it takes until like August or even September to get a new strategic plan in place, given all the stuff in the air right now. The other thought is, thank you, I rudely applauded you for pointing out that you should not live in fear of the Brown Act, people. The California government has been functioning under it for more than 50 years. 50 years, okay? It's an old law. People manage, if you can't, as Katie suggested, make a mistake here and there and then cure and correct, you might as well just back away and get out of this job that you are in, because that's the way California government works, is you take some risks, you take some chances, but you work hard to follow the law, and you engage your community as much as you can. So I understand a lot of issues with the Brown Act, but it's not your enemy, it's your friend, because it makes sure that everybody out here understands that you're being reasonably transparent in the process. So thank you.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Monica?
Monica Hubbard. I've served on 2 different strategic planning committees for this library in the past several years. Both of them involved a lot of community members. We deliberated for a finite period of time, made our recommendations, and then it went back to staff and the board and whoever was doing it. I'm very concerned about comments that I have heard from the board in the last few months. And I do echo some things we've heard here, that it feels like you are coming from a place of fear, and understandable given what we have been through, all of us together. But there is a temptation, I think, to try to control things tightly. I heard the word messy being used tonight. Community engagement is messy, and it takes time. And I would urge you to move forward with a process that has already been articulated, that includes as many people from the community as possible. And to keep in mind, and I don't remember if it was a sports figure or who said, go slow to go fast. So I would really encourage you, even though it's going to be more messy, it's going to be more time consuming, to involve this community that cares passionately about the library, to not operate from a place of fear. If you make a mistake, gosh, we're sorry, we didn't know, we won't do it again. It's that simple. So please, you know something, we know something, and together we know something more. Involve this community in the process. Thank you.
And comment, for this strategic planning committee, are you planning to give Brown Act training to committee members from the community?
If that's a question, yes, 100%. I think it's valuable not only within the confines of the committee, but also valuable as just part of understanding the way the Brown Act works and the way it impacts the work of government. So absolutely. I don't think we necessarily, no offense, but I don't think we necessarily need legal counsel to do that. I think there are also a lot of really good resources that are available publicly in the public domain that can be made, that can be part of basically an orientation process for anybody who's on the special committee.
Can I make a quick comment? My name is Rex. I'm a retired librarian, and I don't remember what the last wording was, but it seemed like you would definitely want to have staff on this committee too. And so I know we've talked a lot about the public, and we've talked a lot about the board members, but you certainly want to know what the staff thinks, so they can give you an idea of what's realistic and in their terms, and that should definitely be part of the discussion. So I just wanted to put a word in for that.
Great.
Thank you. I concur. Before we kind of go further, I would like to, I take the comment about the timeline, and I think I have to remind myself as the process of democracy goes, I always want to go faster than maybe is possible. So that being said, why don't we revise that timeline for the delivery of a plan to the board to September 1st. And whatever the math works out on that as, I couldn't tell you, but let's just say that's the thing.
Any other comment then? I have a comment then, and that is I appreciate the comments from the public. You know, when you've been stung by a bee, you don't go near bees for a while. And that's the place I'm in right now. I understand the need for transparency. People have been wanting that for a long time now, and it's been hard to get for various circumstances. I still believe that we could make an effective committee without having it become a legislative body, and that we could get input from the public that would be as good as inviting them to the table in a committee and so on. But I am swayed a little bit by the comments that we can't live in fear. Katie, I suspect that you'll do a good job of Brown Act training and things like that that need to be done on a committee like this. But I guess I am coming around to the fact that in this case, with the strategic plan, it might be a good idea to involve the committee and expand, or the public and expand the committee. But I heard you say early on that you sort of take responsibility for that too.
I do.
And not letting it fall into the area where Brown Act violations could be supported and or identified and weaponized a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't want to see that happen.
Nor would I.
Okay. So if I could just get one more reading or, interpretation of what's been said, I'd appreciate it, and then I think we'd be ready for a vote.
Is there a motion and a second on this?
I moved a long time ago, but then we talked a bunch, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
I have the special committee, Katie and Jason, including members of the public, to compose a legislative body subject to the Brown Act that would basically review and create.
Yeah, that would draft, hang on, I have language here, give me 1 second.
Or draft a new strategic plan to
Yeah,
bring to the
yeah, it
board.
doesn't have to be that complicated. They would draft a new strategic plan, to be brought to the board.
No later than September
Correct.
1st.
All right, so that's the motion then?
It is.
Okay, maybe we should, one more time, make the motion and second it simply because it's changed a little bit from what it was before. So is there, do I get a motion to?
So I move all that stuff Kylan just said about the special committee.
Okay.
I second
A
that
second,
motion.
Okay, so we are ready for a vote. I think the discussion parts went way too far, but very valuable. So Jason, Trustee Capel, your vote, please.
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
All right, the motion passes then. We are now on to, I've been asked for a recess, a 5-minute recess, and we're going to do that right now.
Sorry.
So we're back from a recess at 8:47. And we are on to the next item of business, which is, too much paper here.
Oh, Brennan.
We're at new business, and yeah.
Where's who?
Interestingly, it starts with Brown Act refresher. So this is an information piece, and this is something that I think we had in mind when it was proposed that we would be getting some advice from BB&K regarding Brown Act training. So we talked about this a little bit, John. So I don't know if there's anything, someone tell me if there is, formally planned for tonight for the Brown Act.
Well, Ruben asked me to just spend a few minutes talking about the difference between an ad hoc committee and a planning committee.
Okay.
And I think we covered that.
Okay,
pretty well. What
I
I would
would
suggest is that Ruben get together with your board secretary and schedule a date where you can have some formal Brown Act training for this board and for all your committees.
It's hard to hear you.
Yeah. Well, that's because I'm not on.
Oh.
God, those hosts.
How
So-
about allocating some money for new microphones?
No, they're working.
The batteries all went out.
Well, in any event, there we go. I would suggest that Ruben work with your staff to get together an agenda item for a formal Brown Act training that covers all the topics. I mean, we've had a couple tonight, teleconferencing, committees, but there's a wealth of laws in the Brown Act that are ever changing. So I would suggest that be agendized as a formal item.
So I think that you're suggesting, and I agree, that the debate that we had about an ad hoc committee versus a standing committee and all the Brown Act ramifications of that was a training lesson number one for us, and I do agree that that's occurred. So going forward, you're saying that we will expect to hear items regarding teleconferencing, like you said, other things like that, right?
I think you'd probably spend about 45 minutes to an hour going through a formal training where you cover soup to nuts and bolts.
Many of the board members have already gone over that.
And
May I just tell you that, yes, many of us already have done a full formal training, and in the wake of the help that we got from Christine in kind of, tying up our last chapter in this regard, that will happen, I think, if it hasn't already, for the brand new members of the board. But then the idea was little doses of it every meeting, so that when practicalities come up, that we always have a chance to talk about them, and I do think we did do that already.
I'm certainly welcome to carry back a message of any particular topics you want to discuss. Otherwise, we'll just bring you back some interesting little Brown Act tidbits.
Tidbits.
That works.
Sounds good.
Great.
Given that there's going to be a strategic planning committee with a bunch of bylaws stuff and a bylaws committee, I would volunteer to talk to Ruben and come up with basically a curriculum for the next 12 months. I think that'd be really helpful to have some specifics laid out sooner rather than later so that we don't find ourselves learning something in July that we wish we'd known in April.
And not to belabor the point, it might be important that they get the full training once they become.
I do not disagree with you.
And from there, we can bring back other points.
All right.
Mr.
Thank you,
President, I may have neglected to put in a speaker.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Renee. You did, and that's my bad, so please go ahead.
I just wanted to cover a lot of this earlier, but Brown Act's pretty straightforward. Brown Act has a few little twists, but not many. And some of you may remember that a year or so ago, I volunteered to pay for Brown Act training to bring down Terry Frank, the fellow who wrote the most recent revisions and is in charge of Cal-Aware, et cetera. You guys didn't take me up on that offer for whatever reason, and things went as they went. I'm concerned as a taxpayer that when you bring in an attorney from BB&K for a 10-minute session, it does not cost the taxpayers 1/6 of an hour time. Travel time is involved, and there's probably at least a minimum of an hour or two, making that a relatively expensive tidbit for you people. It may look good, but it's a lot of money. Having an attorney sit through an entire meeting is expensive. And so to the degree to which that's not needed, is a really great idea, meaning that having a library director who can guide you in real time on a lot of these issues is a great idea. We don't have that anymore, but it's just something to think about throughout all of this. That all at once is better than drip by drip by drip. I understand, as I pointed out previously, that this would be the sort of thing that a judge would look on favorably had this gone into a court decision against the library district. I'm glad it didn't, but it's just something to think about. Okay, thank you.
And at the last meeting, Christine did say that it was not something that BB&K had to facilitate every month, that I could do it, anybody could do it. So just to clarify, I think you weren't at the last meeting, but she did say that. So yeah, but it was designed to be an agenda item continuing, and we can get together once you talk to BB&K. I don't know, I think they were going to help us in laying that out, like you said.
I think if we structure a curriculum and we have the topics clearly laid out, it will not be difficult to be briefed by staff or the interim director or whomever is appropriate for that.
Okay. B and C.
All right.
And done.
Moving on to the next item then, and Renee, I've got you speaking next at 14F, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. The next item is the liaison to the Friends of the Altadena Library. We're overdue with that. And the bylaws state that the president of the board will name the liaison, and then there's a vote taken to approve that. It's my interpretation of that. So I would like to name Jason Capel to that position, that liaison. I think it makes sense for him to do that, given he will also be on the Facilities Committee and can relay appropriate information back and forth. So with that, I would seek a motion to approve Jason Capel as the Friends of the Lake Library liaison.
I'll move that.
And I'll second that.
Second, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion about that? You okay with that, Jason?
Yes, that's fine with me. Appreciate it.
Okay, let's do a vote then. Trustee Capel?
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
And Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next item is Board of Library Trustees agenda and board packet format. And if memory serves, this was something that was requested to talk just generally and quickly about maybe changes or extra information that we'd like to see in the board packet and in the agenda. And there's already been some direction established in tonight's agenda, in that the closed session was put right up front, and we got that over with, and I think met our commitment of an hour. Seems a long time ago now. But I guess I'll open this up to, I'm not sure what action is required for this just yet. I think I'd like to open it up to discussion first. So are there any comments about changes or improvements that you'd like to see in the packet and the agenda?
So I requested this item, so if I could just quickly outline a couple of things. I know it's late, and there's nothing anybody wants to do more at 9 o'clock at night than talk about agendas. So.
And there's a draft, your draft is on page 42.
Yeah, so I included, and thank you for including it in the board packet. There's a sample draft of an agenda, and basically my thinking here is it would be good, once again, if we were consistent with sort of the best practices of similar institutions. And there are a couple of ways in which we can accomplish that. One, as Terry mentioned, is putting a closed session if it needs to occur at the very beginning of a meeting. This serves two purposes. One, it allows a start time that's a little bit later, and 5 p.m. is a difficult time for people, you know, who are working a 9-to-5 job to show up for. So it allows us to start a little bit later if need be. And secondly, it allows us to discuss what happened in a closed session during the course of the meeting. So I think it's a pretty important thing to do. So I would encourage us to follow that practice regularly, unless there's some extraordinary reason why we can't. The other adjustments that I'd like to recommend. One, I would recommend that we have all the reports go together and happen at the beginning of the meeting. So again, this is a pretty standard thing, that reports of support groups, reports of any departmental heads that need to speak to the board, reports from any outside agencies that are talking to us, and reports of trustees all happen before we get into either unfinished or new business. So putting that up at the top of the agenda. The third thing would be that we separate a little bit more clearly information and action items. I know sometimes that's not always possible, but insofar as it is, it would be nice to know what we're hearing that's just informational and what we are going to take action on. I think it will also help people who are looking through the agenda understand where the inflection points are in an evening and what it is that the board might be expected to do. So there are some times when I get that we have to have an information/action, but as much as we can, I think it would be good to separate those out and delineate them. And I'm totally forgetting something. There were 4.
Do you mean in its place on the agenda, or specifically the description following the item?
Right, it's a really good question. So for example, on like item 13C today, right? We have the presentation from our auditors, and it's labeled information/action. So I would recommend we just separate that into 2 items. Item 1 is the presentation from the auditors, information. Item 2 is the receive and file report from the auditors, action. Does that make sense? As a separate item. Yeah, so that insofar as it's possible, and again, I get that it's not always going to be possible, but we can separate those.
I will say that our agendas used to include information only or discussion and action, and coming from that place of fear, we started including, because what happened in the past was action taken on information only.
Right.
Item. So I think that's where that may have started, is the information/action on every single item.
Right.
But it does make sense, and I would appreciate going back to separating so that we know kind of what's going on.
And I get that, right? Because it would be really irritating if we figured out halfway through an item like, oh, we wanted to take action on this and we blew it because we didn't put it on the agenda as an action item. Well, we call a special meeting or we do it next time. But I think it will help us be a little bit more consistent in our practices. And if we make a couple mistakes, we'll learn how to do a better job fairly quickly. And I do think it's important, because any item that is marked action, there's going to have to be a motion taken on, which in and of itself includes discussion, right? So I just think it'll help kind of impel us towards a little bit better structure and a little bit more clarity. and I remembered my fourth thing. So first thing, closed session at the beginning. Second thing, reports all together, so like group with like. Third thing, information and action separated. And then fourth thing, and this is a really nitpicky thing, but we call old business unfinished business. That is sort of the best practice in Robert's Rules of Order, because it means it's not old, we just haven't wrapped it up yet, right? So it's carried over from the last one, so it kind of helps people understand, it's not like we're rehashing something, it's that we didn't get it done last time, so we're taking it up again. So I would recommend those 4 items. I'd love to hear what people think, but I think it would help us be a little bit more structured.
Can I just ask, with the information action thing, for example, how would 14 look in the way that you're proposing? Would it now have,
Yeah.
13 items on it?
No, I don't think
Okay.
so. So for example, 14A would say Brown Act refresher information. 14B would say appointment of liaison to Friends of the Altadena Library, action. Because there's not like a report that you need, right, to take any action on that. Board of Library Trustees agenda and board packet format. I guess technically you could do an information thing on that and then an action thing. That might be kind of overkill. I think you could just do action. Because again, like everything that we're gonna vote on, there's gonna be some discussion. So it doesn't mean there's no discussion, it just means, is the point of that item to learn something? Or is the point of that item to do something? Yeah, and I just think that clarification is really helpful.
And to be clear, you can get information about something if it doesn't say information, but you cannot act on something if it doesn't say action.
That's my understanding. Yeah.
All right, are there any other topics regarding the agenda? Because I'd like to kind of separate this into 2 things. One's the board packet and one's the agenda. So Jason, do you have anything to add regarding the agenda?
No, not on this issue.
Okay, my comments are about the board packet, and just a couple little things for me. I'd like to see, I see the reports coming in, but I'm still so bad with names and stuff. I'd love to see who wrote those reports, because they've gone unsigned for a few months now. I know in the old days, they used to have who was writing that report, so I would know who to go back and talk to about it. And that's something I would imagine that's easily done, Kylan, okay. Really, that's about it. There is one thing about, I'll bring this up now, about the timing of the minutes. I would like personally to see the minutes a little earlier in the, and I don't know what the best practice is or the rule of thumb is for minutes. If they get, are they traditionally inserted into the board packet, close to the next board meeting, or do they float up for the board members to review mid-month before the meeting happens?
So typically, the minutes are, the draft minutes are part of the board package for all of the board members to review ahead of the meeting, so that if they need to pull them out and discuss them at the meeting, they can do so. The goal in the past has been to get the board package out 2 weeks prior to the meeting. That has not happened in a very long time because of the timing of getting a final agenda. There has been a lot of back and forth necessary between legal counsel and the district president and the director. So it's definitely our goal to get the board package out as soon as possible. I would love to get the board package in the board members' hands, a week, 2 weeks before the meeting, because you really do need time to consider a lot of what you're going to be discussing at the meeting, but that is, a much larger discussion and involves more people, and, are even here at this point.
Can I make a comment about the minutes? Is there any reason why the minutes can only surface at the time the packet is ready? I mean, I know the minutes need to, we need to get the minutes at the same time the public gets the minutes. But couldn't they just be, you post them to the website anyway, couldn't you just post them? Because, not only are they necessary for us to, discuss and approve of them, but they're our working document for the month between one meeting and the next. And, we all sit up here and take notes about what we said we were gonna do, but without the record of the minutes, it's really hard to do that.
So the
Video is posted usually within a couple of days of the meeting. If you guys would like an email when that goes up with the link, I'd be happy to do that. I can definitely send the draft minutes to the board and get them posted on the website. I think it would be important to note that they are draft minutes, because typically we have waited until they're approved to post them to the website, because if something changes or there was a correction, I mean, it feels, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can comment on this. I would be nervous to release draft minutes to the public, because there may be corrections, you may have said something differently than, and that needs to be discussed at the meeting. But, yeah, I mean, I guess you guys can decide.
They would have to be labeled draft because they have not been ratified by the board.
So the idea of getting the minutes to the board members ahead of getting them to the public is?
Can't do it. I don't think, is that even allowed?
I think that it becomes a public record.
Okay.
So once it's submitted to the board, it's a public record, and anyone can get a copy of it. And the problem with doing that is, again, they're getting draft minutes, so.
Is the video actually a stronger record of what happened in the meeting than the minutes that are written? I mean, there's a lot of nuance in the video, obviously, that happens. Does one take precedence over another as sort of an official record or document?
No, the minutes are the formal action of the board. They are
Okay.
adopted by the board and ratified, so.
Well, I think speaking for myself on the minute issue is that sometimes you want to see those prior to getting the board packet ready. I know it's been really tough lately with all
And again,
the
yeah,
moving pieces.
It's ideal that we are not getting the board package out the day before, or the Friday before the meeting. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. This has been more informational than action for me, just talking this through, because I didn't quite know what the
And
process.
this doesn't
Have to be decided now,
Right.
because obviously I am a staff member that works for the board, so, if you guys want something, definitely when it comes to the agenda, I think that will be a discussion with the director and Terry, but, I mean, obviously, I guess you guys should decide collectively if you want the draft minutes, because this is your place to discuss that collectively, but, I mean, I don't know, this is a question for legal counsel, if the draft minutes are given to a member of the board, a member of the public can request them, but do they have to be posted at that point automatically?
I would, yes, to the extent you make all your, to the extent you pass documents to members of your board and you post those on the website, if that's your practice, it should be posted to the website. It should just be labeled draft because they have been ratified.
I don't know if there's any action that's needed on either of these items that we just talked about. Help me out, trustees. The things that you discussed, Katie, about the agenda and the order and such, I think those are items of, in my personal opinion, they'd be items of sort of best practice that we could try to implement versus making it formal, only because that special, the closed session, for example, might have to be pushed down to the end of an agenda sometime because of the length of it or something, so.
Sure. No, I think there's sort of, I don't know, administration requests, really, more than anything, so.
Right, and I would request that the board, or the president and the director, maybe with legal counsel, try to get that agenda finalized as soon as possible. Maybe whether it's starting the process a little earlier in the month, if something doesn't get on the agenda. I mean, So the agenda, obviously, once it's posted, then that's the agenda, and it's a little more difficult to amend it, but, you know, having the board package ready a week before, I don't see many things, I mean, going forward, definitely in the past it's not been the case, but going forward, things within that week that are gonna change the agenda substantially. So I would just request that, and this was a request I've had in the past as well, is just working on trying to get that agenda finalized so that that board package can be put together and given to you guys as soon as possible.
Okay, you're saying it's really a team function, the director, the president, and you, and we can move that up if we want to. So I get that, and this has been very helpful to me because I'm just doing what we've been doing for the last few months, and I know that's been a bit of an aberration because of the things we've been handling. So I don't see a need for any action on this again, so, and I'm thinking we can just move on to the next item.
Does that mean then you're going to try this or you're not going to try this? If you're saying, I'm just trying to understand what that means. If this is a sample agenda format, are we going to try incorporating this in the next month or so? Or are we, it's just information? How do you want to do that? It might make a lot of sense to do it that way.
I mean, according to our bylaws, it's the director who creates the agenda. And so it's between the two of you, and of course with Kylene's help, that happens. So I see us as just taking this as great ideas that they can incorporate in as they you know, move ahead and planning meetings into the future. But I don't think it's not up to us to decide anything. It's just
well, we give the directive to the to whoever is going to be the intern or the director. So it makes some sense as to some of the things here as opposed to, and I just ask that the page numbers be placed on the agenda where it's easy to find it, and might be an interesting one to see how that works out versus the old one that we've done.
Yeah, and Gwen, I just say, like, as far as the sample agenda format, it's not.
Oh, it's not critical, but it's
No.
something to think about.
Oh, no, I agree, and I'm not saying like we need to do exactly this.
Mm.
It was sort of my best attempt at maybe sort of updating some of the ways in which we do things, but, you know, for
And
what that's,
typically the
yeah.
page numbers are on there. I'm not sure what happened. This time around, we noticed after it went out that the page numbers weren't saved on there, so we'll be careful.
All righty. Move on. Let's move on.
Okay, so you're not proposing a motion of any type then, Gwen? I think what we've just discussed is sort of a best practices discussion.
Okay.
And want to try out a few things going forward is basically it.
Right.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Then we get to this one called community member, or board member community outreach, and this is really for one specific item. There's a Chamber of Commerce dinner coming up on the 1st of February, and in the past, the library, who is a member and pays dues, has, I don't know, it was the last year or maybe the year before, bought a table in which there were a few members of the board, it was my understanding, and maybe a staff member or two. I think there were 6, we talked about this, I think, Kylen, maybe 6 people, if there are 6 places at the table, versus, in this case, just maybe one person, one liaison from the board to go to the chamber dinner, which is going to be held over at Webster's on Friday night, just to make an appearance and reach out to the community that way. So what I had in mind, and I think I'm the one that first asked for this to be on the board, would be just that. Do we send one person? And I'm happy to volunteer for that, and I'm assuming that the fees for that dinner could be run back to the library as a, you know, a membership kind of a thing or so on. Or do we get a table and get more than one board member attending And then the follow-up question, of course, this would be legal, would that be okay under the Brown Act to have a group at this social event at the same table? I'm assuming it would be, but I just want to double check on that.
It would be provided you don't,
Talk
as a
about,
member of the quorum, talk about business within the subject
Okay,
matter
yeah,
jurisdiction.
that was my understanding too. So I'll put it to us on the board. Would we like to buy a table for this, or just have one or two people go on their own?
well, in the past, we've provided a table, I believe, for the last couple of years. Is that right?
And just
Good
To clarify,
communities.
some trustees have elected to not have the library pay their ticket, they have paid their own ticket. If the library reimburses you or pays for a ticket, that is a gift reportable on your, Form 700. But that has been at the discretion of the board, but the board has collectively gone to represent the library. But definitely trustees in the past, they have had their own opinions as to whether or not the library should pay for their ticket or not. So that's kind of been their own personal decision.
Mr. President, if you'd accept public comment?
I had you down
I
for...
didn't put a speaker card in, I apologize, but just, this struck me as you folks are discussing this, and you're talking about the relationship with the community. This is a good way for the library to make it look good to the business community, that occasionally you send a press release out saying that the library remains open to businesses. So, because somebody else other than working in the library wrote the press release. But basically, you should support the local businesses in the way that you want them to support you. Another thought along all that is that if 3 board members go, and it's simply a social event, it's not a Brown Act violation, as long as you've heard, you don't discuss library business. The other thought, though, is if it is 6, it's a nice thing and a nice consideration to invite staff members as a, hey, come on out to a nice dinner, because we appreciate you. That's something that doesn't happen very often anymore in this library. And I think it would be a great opportunity for the board to be gracious about that. So, thank you.
And I did want to clarify, in the past, it has been the Board of Trustees, usually the president of the Friends and/or Foundation, and the director or public service director, depending on how many seats there were and how many people were or were not attending. That's kind of been how it's gone down the list.
Thanks.
Well, this topic's a little sticky because it's this Friday, and, we might have trouble assembling a table of people to show up for this. I'm here to report that I will be going to the dinner, and I'm actually buying my own ticket, but wanted to make the system or the message available to the rest of the trustees to find out if we need to have a wider representation.
I'd like to go also. I don't know how much it is. I'm assuming it's the same price as it was last time, but I'd like to go also, and I purchased my own ticket also.
Okay, I think it's $85 for the ticket.
That's fine.
Okay.
Shall I give it to Kylie and she'll take care of it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you so much.
So we've got a couple, but not a full table, and I guess that's where I was going with this whole thing. I'm not looking at you, all the pressure you're into going. I can't see Jason from here, but just wanted to bring it to the attention of folks, and I think that the concept of the library starting to reach out more than we have in the past because we've been handcuffed to the dais here is a good thing to start, and looking for events like this to be involved with.
I've just received confirmation that my Friday evening is clear up. So, yeah, I'll go, and I'll pay for my own ticket.
So, should we?
This is Jason. I'm not available, but I support if the board decides to purchase a whole table, and hopefully one of the staff members would be able to go in my place.
So that opens up the question then of whether we want to, as a board, approve the purchase of a table and then try to fill the seats during the next week with representatives.
I so move. Go ahead.
So
I'll
that,
second it.
okay, that's been moved and seconded, then we're going to vote then on purchasing a table for the Chamber of Commerce dinner pending our ability to do so, because it's coming up pretty quickly. We think we can still do it.
Do you want to clarify the number? Because I think, I don't remember the number on the, because I know that
Is it
you can
6 or
buy
8?
the, let's see. I know they gave you the option of like 6, 8, 10, but I don't know if the actual table number, they've clarified that. I'm just gonna check. But if you guys want to specify, let's see, oh, table 8, table 10, or table 12. So it sounds like the smallest quantity is 8, yeah.
Can I propose, and this is discussion now, I guess, that we purchase a table of 8, and that those who have already said they want to go can, that the board commit to a table of 8, and that those who go can make the decision about paying their own ticket or not.
Yeah, and
So I think Gwen, this was, her point was that any trustee that wants to pay for their own ticket can just reimburse the library, and that covers that basically.
Great.
For 1/8 of the table.
Right,
then.
so, right, so I don't know, Terry, if you've already purchased your ticket, but I can purchase the table, and then whoever decides they want to reimburse the library for their specific ticket, because they don't like discount tables, they're all, the tickets are what they are. So, yeah, any trustee can reimburse the library for their specific ticket.
So the motion as it stands right now is to buy a table for the library, and it sounds like it would be a table for 8, and that the trustees who wish to go have the option of either taking it as a gift, as you described, or reimbursing for 1/8 of a table. The only part that hasn't been put into this motion would be the method by which other people, it sounds like we might have as many as 5 other people, seats for those folks, how they would be identified and recruited and so on. Is that something that you got involved with in the past, Kylie?
well, like I said,
In the past, it has been open up to the president of the foundation, the president of the Friends, the director. I know that to fill the table, the public services director was invited. I'm not sure, I'd have to look back and see kind of how that.
So if I'm counting right, Betsy, Terry, Gwen, me, Bridget, Mark, Cindy.
It was Jason, not Betsy.
Oh, I thought
Jason.
Jason said he couldn't go.
Jason can't go.
Oh, Jason
no.
can't go, I
No.
can't go.
Oh, you can't go, okay, sorry, so then we have two
Terry,
spots.
Gwen, Katie,
Yeah, Terry, Gwen, Katie, Bridget, Mark,
if they
if they can go, Stella, Cindy, and then we just need one more.
Okay, I'll go.
John.
Cool, done.
Okay, so that's made it
So,
into the
I mean,
motion then?
Yeah, I will, I guess, reach out to those other individuals, or if you want to reach out to Cindy, I don't have contact information, but
Why don't I reach out via email to the Friends and to the Foundation, invite them, and if there are staff people involved, I think maybe that if it came from the director, from you, kind of internally, that might be a good way to go.
yeah. I mean, it's soon, so hopefully we'll know if they can.
Right.
Great.
Okay.
It's the first.
To interact with everybody every day. Like maybe even from the Bob Lucas branch.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice
There's
gesture.
some thought that needs to be put into this, but I think the tier that you identified is one that should be, because it's traditional to invite. So, did all that make it into the motion then? We're gonna, I move, or
Well, I
is-
think the motion was that the library
The
purchase
buy
a table of 8. Yeah.
Okay.
that's fine.
Seconded.
The other discussion.
all right, so good for a vote, Jason?
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
And Trustee McMullin?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
And I did have a second from Glenn.
I withdraw myself.
All right, the next item is 14E, and it's a tree service, a long overdue report from Jonathan.
Can we combine both E and F
Ye-
together? You go ahead first.
Yes, Renee, you can speak to F now because we're going to do them both at the same time.
Okay, great, thank you. Just wanted to talk briefly about the ADA doors over at Bob Lucas. It's a great little place. I probably live closer to that location than anybody else here in this room. It's, I can't quite spit at it, but I am very, very close to that location. And it's a wonderful little place. It has, I believe, ADA compliant bathrooms. You can't get to them though because the doors are not ADA compliant. And it's a wonderful little place. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's about the size of a small shoebox. I don't think it is larger than this room. I think it is smaller than this room. And there's a lot of stuff in there. So adding doors to that branch, great thing. People can get in. Can they move around? Can they actually get to those bathrooms while there's an event in play, while stuff is moved around? They move things from one part of that library to another to try and provide space. That space is too small to serve as a functional library for the Northwest Altadena community. It's not ADA compliant as it stands. There are ADA compliant facilities in Northwest Altadena that, as the strategic plan unfolds, it would behoove this library district to look at as a way to properly serve the Northwest Altadena community. Again, ADA accessibility is just one feature and factor of all that needs to be rolled into that. So I doubt any of you think that by adding ADA compliant doors, much as we have here, added doors, it's still not ADA compliant. So I hope you don't think that by taking that minor step, that in any way it cures the issues of ADA compliance. Thank you.
Right, Jonathan?
So, let's start with the tree service. So, we wanted to do last year the Deodora pines and also the cedar pines, the canary pines that we needed to do, and this is the season to do it. We missed the window of opportunity last year because of some issues that were going on. Someone wanted some type of a email blast to go out to the community, and the community, it delayed us some, but we do have a person by the name of Rebecca Lotta, who is an arborist, and she's a friend of the community, a friend of the library. And so talking to her, going through the procedure that we want to do, the only person that met our criteria for this project to do our cedars and our canary pines was a company called Phil & Sons. Phil & Sons is an Altadena company. They are well known. Lee Adams from the Arboretum speaks highly of them. Rebecca Lotta speaks highly of them. And they are a great outfit. They did exactly, we read to the, you go to read their service, their scope of work they were going to do. They were going to reduce the laterals as needed, reduce the crown lightly, mitigate the weight appropriately. They also saw something on one of the trees that there was a dominant, co-dominant trunk, and they were going to take care of that. This would help with the longevity of our trees. This would help also because we've been having some issues lately with pine cones falling on the staff cars and making really dents in the windows. So we think they're killer squirrels, but that's what's happening with that. So we are going to take care of that situation by maintaining our trees respectable. And in the future, I know there's something happening in 2020 that we will talk about with Christmas Tree Lane. They want to do something with the library, with our trees, but that's going to be spoken in the future when I speak more with Tony Ward. But anyway, this will take care of it. All of the shadings, all of the mulch will stay here on site. And so that will be according, we will fix our garden area, make sure that we would help with our drought-resistant plants, and also help with protecting, keeping the moisture in with the plants. So all that's gonna stay here. They would do it over a time of 3 Sundays. That way it would help alleviate safety issues, and it would protect our patrons and our staff. And so they do it on a Sunday. So that's my proposal, and my suggestion is that we use Phil and Sons for our service. They are a little more expensive, but they are worth the amount of money. You get what you pay for. So that's why I want to go with that.
And Jonathan, could I just ask real quick?
Yes, sir.
You said they're a little bit more expensive, and can you just briefly restate what the qualities are, what their program is that elevates them above the other companies?
Besides being recommended by an arborist and also by Lee Adams, they've been in the business for several years, and also an Altadena company. But this man, Phil, goes constantly to seminars, specifically to take care of on deodoras and on cedar trees. In the cedar trees and on the canary pines. So he knows exactly. He was the one who came by and did a whole scope so fast, it was amazing. But when he spoke to me, he just made it very clear how everything was going to be taken care of. He had a kid's glove approach on it to make sure that everything was done correctly. His expertise in this matter is very viable, and like I said, Rebecca Lotta spoke highly of him, and she's very prominent as an arborist.
Thank you.
Just
Yes,
one
ma'am.
real quick question. So I'm trying to find it in the budget. So this is about 14 grand
Yeah,
for this
this-
project, and this is coming out of our landscape line item, or is it grounds and maintenance?
It would most likely be grounds and maintenance.
Okay.
Yes.
And how much do we have left in that? But I mean, I know we're gonna do our mid-year budget adjustments, all gonna kind of move around, but are we on track, or is this sort of taking us? I was just looking to see where we are in each of those, and it looks to me,
Is it in the budget?
like we should be okay, but I just would like to get that verified.
We have been very prudent on our grounds and facilities for that, so we've been
Yeah.
very careful of what we do purchase. And so this would be one of the major issues that we do, but we haven't done tree service on our deodars for several years.
Yeah, and I definitely don't disagree with the necessity of it, or even with the
Yes, ma'am.
recommendation of the vendor. I just wanna know where that puts us in terms of our budget. And if, we can talk about it later if it's,
No, I misspoke, actually. It is coming out of our landscaping budget because we did budget 18,000 for
Oh,
the year.
okay.
So that's,
so we're probably,
that was that.
perfect, thank you.
And did we get it out? Is that budget item 7205?
It's 7220.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
Yeah, for the,
Looking at-
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at the actual on page 6. And you're saying that
It's
you
on
have it
page
on
12,
page.
actually, of the.
Well, I'm looking at 6 on the landscaping, 7220.
7220. Yeah.
That's a previous year comparison. Is it
Okay.
the 7,000 figure that you're looking at?
Yes,
That was what we spent last year.
okay then, all right.
Do you wanna go ahead and, oh, sorry,
Okay.
are we gonna do the report on both of these?
Well, if you want to just go ahead and see if you want to approve the first one on the trees, because this is the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Because what SCE did last couple of years ago, cutting it during the wrong side, it made Altadena really upset. And so this is the perfect time.
Why don't we put a motion up for this one first and then hear
Okay.
about the second?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
I move that we go ahead and approve, this contract.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Okay,
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
I've used Phil and Sons. They're awesome.
And another thing,
Highly recommend.
also with this approval, if you read on the staff memo, it says that you also recommend to give the authority to the interim director to be able to sign the contract,
We
okay?
just include that in the motion.
Okay.
Okay, I amend my motion to include that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the Phil and Sons tree service quote. And
I was.
Betsy was. So I'll start with a vote. Jason, your vote, please.
Aye.
Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
Motion carries. Can you go ahead, Jonathan?
Yes, the next one is for the ADA doors, compliant doors. As you read from the staff memo, the doors have, and the original ones are in the very front. They are locked at night by a chain. So that's really, we need to take care of that. And also the back one, there's a lot of scratches on these doors, and they're very heavy, and they do not open by themselves. They also need to be propped up by a rock. The first one, it does. It needs to be propped by a rock to be able to enter in. So with ADA compliant doors that we have, at least, it would be much more, it would be much helpful to a lot of the community to be able to, when they have the door buttons on the outside, to access the doors, the doors will open appropriately, allow people to come in. We will also have the function to be able to keep the door open, especially when we do have some events. There was a bike event, as you remember, and there was a rock that was holding that door open, and that was not really good. But this way, these doors will be more secure for the community. I'm also going to work on something else to make it more energy efficient. The windows will be more energy efficient because there's certain light that comes in the afternoon that really does cause some havoc to some of the staff and some of the patrons there. We are going to use the company called sorry, I did tell you, not Vortex, Commercial Door Metal Systems. They have been around for a long time, and they met all our criteria, especially when it comes to, because this is a prevailing wage job. Right? So they met all our criteria. They have their DRR number, they are certified payroll, and they will take care of that. The budget will come out of capital expenses, of course. Okay, so to let you know that. Okay, but that will be taken care of. They will do it over during the week. It will take a 3-day process to do it, but they will make sure that the doors are installed and install one set of doors one day, install another set of doors the next day, third day, do any final cleanup that needs to be done, but it will be a 3-day process. And so my recommendation is for the board to approve Commercial Door Metal Systems to do these doors.
And I didn't hear the company, I'm sorry.
Commercial Door Metal Systems.
Okay.
It's the last one. The last one.
Is that the one
And
that's
also because they did come in at a
24,000?
very appropriate price.
Can we
Is that-
pause just for 30 seconds because my computer is going to die. And I was gonna say that.
24,000.
Oh, man.
Reading, why can't they do Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Because it is more money during the weekends. Yes, ma'am.
Will it require closure? to get
No,
done?
will not.
No.
That's the one thing. It be a noise factor, and that's the thing about it. They are very, unlike the tree service, which, falling branches, something like that can happen with the patrons. This one is more, they will block off the entrances when necessary. So front entrance will be available when the back entrance is being worked on, and the back entrance will be available when the front entrance is being worked on. So they will do it appropriately at that time. And I've seen another company that I've worked with before called Vortex, and how they've done that, done the work, and it's very encumbersome.
Any other questions?
How many hours a day?
They will give me more of the breakdown later on. And they haven't given me, I don't know if it's going to be a 6 to 8 hour time, or if they just install it as fast as possible. But my experience seeing these guys do put in the doors, it's probably maybe between a 4 to 6 hour process. Because they are replacing the whole unit, everything.
The door frame and all.
Door frame and all, yes.
Will they start when the library opens in the morning?
They will, I will work with that. I will work with that.
So, is there a motion to approve Commercial Door Metal Systems as the vendor for this?
I'll approve that. I'll move that motion.
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded to,
And to give the authority to the interim director to sign.
Yes. And give the authority to enter director to sign the contract.
so the,
Yes, with that
it's been
addition.
moved and seconded to award the contract to Commercial Door Metal Systems and have the interim director sign the contract.
Yes.
Okay, get a vote. Trustee Capel?
He's going to sleep.
Right now on a proposal to approve Commercial Door Metal Systems as the vendor for some door replacements at the Lucas branch. And it's been.
Yeah, I caught most of the presentation.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve that contract with an interim director signing for approval. And we're now to the vote stage. So I started with you before we realized you weren't there anymore. And so we'll go ahead. Can I get your vote on this one?
Aye.
Okay, and Trustee Clark?
Aye.
Trustee Andrews, aye. Trustee Khan?
Aye.
And Trustee McMullins?
Aye.
All right, that motion carries as well. And there being no more business, I'm sorry, did I miss one? Oh, okay, gotcha, sorry. Reports of trustees. Do you have any reports?
I mean, I have a report, I'm just gonna go super fast. So my report is basically that I have had the opportunity to show up at a number of community events in the past month, which is really cool. So I've been able to talk to NBBA and sort of represent the process the library is going through, as well as Altadena Heritage, where they held an event for anybody who's sort of bought a home recently in Altadena and moved in. So you're able to meet a lot of new Altadena residents and tell them about the library and everything it does, and that was really cool. And I'm going to have the opportunity in the next 2 weeks to talk to a Girl Scout troop right across the street about what the library does and sort of how local government works. And so I'm really excited to do all of those things. And then the only other report is that on February 14th, I'm going to be out at the Rancho Cucamonga Valley Water District for a special district board best practices workshop. And then on the 20th of November, there's a, 20th, it's really been a long night. On the 20th of February, there is a webinar on transparency for special districts, also through the California Special District Association. So I'm excited about both of those and looking forward to bringing back the useful things that I pick up there. So, the end.
Any other board reports?
No report. I'd like to know about the webinar, though.
I will hook you up.
Okay, thanks.
And then number 16, agenda items for future agendas. Is there anything folks would like to add? Yeah, shorter meetings, okay. That's a resolution. All right, we're to item 17 for adjournment. Do I get a motion to adjourn?
I so move that. We adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I won't even take the count this time. All right, thank you.